Okay, it looks like we're good, so we'll go ahead and get started. And I'd just like to do the flag salute, so if everybody would stand with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, roll call.
Mr. Seveson's absent. Mr. Gray? Here. Mr. Moss?
Here.
Mr. Johnson?
Here.
Nader?
Here.
Mr. Ricucci?
Here.
Mr. Denio?
Here. Okay, we'll go ahead and have our report. EJ?
Oh, you broke it again, EJ.
There we go. We're up. Good morning, Chairman, members of the Commission. I'm E.J. Baldi with the Planning Services Division. First, I'll update you on the recent Board of Supervisors meetings. On January 22nd, the Board considered options for a temporary emergency shelter for the homeless within the DeWitt Center. The Board decided that would retain jurisdiction over this matter rather than have it heard before the Planning Commission, and they ended up continuing the matter to its February 3rd BOS meeting. On February 3rd, the board actually took action to approve that permit. That was to use buildings 303A and B in the Government Center as an emergency shelter. The board also considered a site access agreement with, that was with Right Hand Auburn, and that was for the operation of a temporary emergency shelter. That discussion was continued to the board's February 24th meeting. That was this week. During that meeting, the board did approve the site access agreement with Right Hand Auburn for operation of the temporary facility. My understanding is that they still have to work out a few details before they move forward. On Tuesday, they also considered the Riolo Vineyards specific plan, which your commission took action on. They did not take any formal action on Tuesday. They'll be bringing it back on March 24th, where they'll be looking at amendments to the DA and the fiscal plan once those are finalized. So for the Planning Commission, at the commission hearing on January 22nd, if you recall, your commission took a 7-0 vote on the Rogers variance. That's where you upheld the zoning administrator's decision. That was for the variance for the structures that were built too close to the property lines. That item was not appealed by the appellant, so that's going to be remanded back to code enforcement to follow up on corrective action of that situation. Our next Planning Commission meeting is going to be March 12th. We have 3 items on there: the Squaw Valley Siberia lift replacement. There is a subdivision modification for residents in Alpine Meadows. And then Rio Bravo is going to be coming back. That was, if you recall, they want to add a tub grinder as part of their operation. I know they had some issues to resolve regarding the Placer Parkway and some right-of-way issues. So anyway, they'll be coming back at the March 12th hearing. As I've mentioned before, there's a lot of outstanding Tahoe projects that the applicants and opposing parties are trying to get resolved. So at some point, we will be making a trip up to Tahoe. We just don't have a firm date right now. So that's all I have for my report. We have a couple workshops today on the agenda, and then one extension of time. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer those. Otherwise, we can get started.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, at this time, I'll open it up to the public for comment on any items that are not on our agenda today. If anybody has anything to say to the commission, now is your chance. Seeing none, I'll close that portion, and we'll go to our first item, North Shore Station at Kings Beach Station, extension of time. Alan?
Thank you. Get started. I'm the project planner, Alan Bruce, up from the Tahoe area. This is an extension of time for 3 years for the North Shore Station in Kings Beach. Get everyone oriented on the location. You did take action back in 2009 for this particular project as a conditional use permit and a mitigated neg deck. The location is in the red right here. It's at the gateway coming in from the east. Directly to the north, we consider the grid, which is residential, multifamily, and single-family development. And this location is Kings Beach Special Area number 2, which is the west entryway coming in. Get everyone oriented on the surrounding land uses. You have Caliente Restaurant at this location. There's Kings Beach Car Wash. The particular site used to be a hotel-motel site. It was demolished and removed, and the applicant approached staff back in 2009 to propose the gas station use. There is an easement that goes across the property right here, and there's the Minnow parking lot, which is a public parking area as part of the core project for mitigation measures. There's about 20 parking spaces here that currently stand. And over on the west side is the Pac Bell building there for telephone. Now, here's an orientation of the surrounding land uses. This is from the Minnow parking lot directly to the south. This is looking at the site as it stands today. This is to the west. This is the site. And this is looking over the Kings Beach Car Wash. It is about a 2,500 square foot commercial building. Down below would be the gas station services and operations. Upstairs, at the time when this went through, the applicant was thinking different kinds of land uses. So we did look at the parking to anticipate what those would be. At that time, they didn't know what it was going to be at that for uses. It would be office or retail would be allowed. This gives an orientation what it looks like from the entryway down to the south as well as to the north. To the north, there are fences and a residence there. This is the floor plan. So the fuel gas station is right here with the fuel pumps. The commercial building is here, parking. Here's the easement that goes up to the parking lot area. So staff did review the extension of time to make sure that it still meets the mitigated negative declaration, which it does. There was a letter correspondence that came in that asked several questions about that. Staff reviewed it. It is adequate in our opinion, and we are recommending to staff to redo the approval of that particular environmental document. It's adequate enough for the extension of time, that is. There was a question about the community plan update that is going currently as it goes right now. I don't have a timeline exactly when that's going to be approved, but this particular project is within the confinements of what exists out there today as a community plan, which is allowed by a conditional use permit. So that's what the applicant is exercising. There have been additional correspondence after we received that initial email from Megan Cellini, and she did correspond with me last night. She's unable to make today's meeting, but she did correspond another email to you, what you should have with you. And she was mainly concerned about that type of gas station at this location. Obviously, the land uses do allow it, and so we're proposing extension of time for 3 years on this particular project. In the past, there was 19 emails and letters in favor of the project. It did go to NITRAC, which is our North Tile Regional Advisory Council, unanimously recommending approval to you back in 2009. There was one abstention, and that happened to be Megan on that previously back in 2009. There's a question about also other gas stations being closed. I try to check with their environmental health department about that. I don't have an answer right now. That's outside the preview, obviously, of the extension of time, but it was a good question. Obviously, the county would get involved if the closure of that gas station, we'd have to mediate for, brownfield if necessary. But I don't have an answer. That was one of the questions in one of those emails. With that, if there's any questions, I'd be glad to help out and answer.
Any questions?
Alan, one of the notes that we got from people that were either support or opposition said that there were like 8 gas stations in the area, but I think they were going to a pretty broad area, but there was an indication there's 2 gas stations in Kings Beach. That's correct?
That is correct.
And they're older stations?
That is correct. Yeah, and that's a good point, too. There used to be a gas station, let me go back to the vicinity map, directly on Chipmunk. There used to be a Swiss Mart, they called it, and that one's been removed. So there was an older gas station that's completely removed now. But now there's 2 in the community plan area. That is correct.
Okay. Any other questions for Alan?
Okay. I do have the applicant here.
At this time, I'll open it up if anybody wants to make a comment on this item. What about the applicant? Or the applicant, I'm sorry. Applicant's here. Sorry about that. Didn't mean to. I guarantee I would have given you an opportunity to comment.
Do I hit the, I don't have to do anything?
Yeah, you don't have to if you don't want to.
Oh, okay.
Just state your name.
My name is Leah Kaufman, and long history. We purchased the property back in 2003, and there was a blighted motel. So the hotel had, it was, I guess, the home of a lot of crystal meth users. We had 152 respondents to the police in a year and a half. And so we scraped the hotel, left it a vacant lot, which was maybe a mistake. Then the economy turned bad. We put the property up for sale, and we had a person that came in that had wanted this gas station. And so he spent a couple $100,000 going through the entitlement process, got to the point where the economy really tanked and he backed out. So it may not be a gas station in the future, but all that work and all the planning and all the documents are what we're trying to preserve at this point. Alan did a fabulous job on the staff summary. He pretty much said everything that I could say. I'm here to answer any questions. Hopefully the economy has improved, and the intent for this type of gas station was biofuels, and it had electric car plug-ins. The upstairs was going to be an art gallery and a Pete's Coffee, so it was like a multifaceted building, and then it was, designed to be very compatible with the town.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
any questions?
Questions? Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, now if there's anybody in the public that would like to comment on this? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and close it off and bring it back to commission for a motion on the extension of time.
Okay, well, I'll make a motion on the extension of time. And let me see here. Okay, this mitigated declaration on the North Shore Station was adopted on October 22nd, 2009 by the Planning Commission. And the findings pursuant to CEQ guidelines are appropriate for the extension of time request, as there's no evidence of substantial changes proposed in the project. No substantial changes have occurred with respect to the circumstances under which the project was undertaken, and there is no new information of substantial importance that has been identified. All previous mitigation measures remain applicable to the proposed project. And extension of time, I guess I just covered all that, so that's my motion.
Okay. So
I'll second that.
extension and the second. So roll call.
And conditions?
Your microphone's not on, so I don't know if I heard all that. Oh, subject to time?
And condition.
I think
Conditions?
go on. Yes,
Okay.
if you could just amend that motion to say that you're approving the extension of time subject to the findings and conditions of approval.
Okay, subject to the time and conditions. Okay.
And I still second it.
And, okay, motion second. Okay, roll call.
Mr. Sevison's absent. Mr. Gray?
Yes.
Mr. Moss?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes?
Mr. Nader? Mr. Riccucci?
Yes.
Mr. Denayo?
Yes. Okay, motion carries. We'll go ahead and go to item number 2, West Placer Stormwater Quality Design Manual Workshop.
Good morning. I'm Crystal Jacobson with Placer County Planning Services Division, and with me today is Rebecca Tabor with the Engineering Division. She's going to give a part of the presentation. And then we also have Mary Keller with our Department of Public Works Stormwater group, in case we have any questions that I'm unable to answer. So, whoops. The item before you today is, this is a workshop. It's really an informational item. And it's the West Placer Stormwater Quality Design Manual. So just by way of background, as part of the county's PCCP, the Placer County Conservation Plan, and the permit coverage under the state's NPDES, which is the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System Small Municipal Water Program, we are required to prepare this design manual. And Rebecca Tabor will talk a little bit more about that permit as we get more into the presentation. I do want to point out that the preparation of the manual is really a multi-jurisdictional effort. So it is being funded by Placer County, the City of Auburn, Lincoln, Loomis, and Roseville. And so it will apply to all of our jurisdictions. So just to talk a little bit about where this came from and an understanding of stormwater regulations, it really came from the Clean Water Act in 1987, which really established a structure for regulating stormwater. And so really they created the NPDES program that I just spoke about. And so the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board is actually responsible for issuing those permits. And so they have issued Placer County a permit, which Rebecca, again, will speak about a little bit later. But really the permit requires agencies to implement programs to prevent pollution, improve and protect stormwater quality, reduce stormwater runoff, and then really enhance the ecologic vitality of our watersheds. So some key changes in stormwater regulation. There's a focus to go towards kind of small-scale, decentralized stormwater management practices, focus on eliminating pollution at its source. The approach is intended to kind of mimic pre-development conditions on site, so pre-development hydrology, and then really also to treat water at its site, so water quality treatment on site. The manual is intended to provide technical guidance to project proponents and developers as they develop their projects. It really to develop designs that require the implementation of permanent stormwater BMPs, best management practices, and then really to comply with that permit I talked about, and also the PCCP as it relates to wetland infill. So the manual only pertains to the west portion of the Placer County. It does not pertain to the eastern portion that you see here. So this is the boundary here. And then the standards will take effect in July 1st, 2015. So really one of the key drivers to the new permit is the treatment of water quality. And the treatment of water quality intended that the pollutants are the suspended soils and sediments, the nutrients, metals, oils and greases, bacteria, pesticides and herbicides, and increased water temperature as well. So just to talk a little bit about the old approach and how we've done business to date really is collecting, conveying, detaining large volumes of stormwater. So this is an example of a kind of a lot and block type subdivision where, you know, pretty much the entire site of the subdivision is developed into lots. All of those lots presumably could have, you know, a substantial amount of impervious surface, and so with that impervious surface you get a lot of stormwater runoff. And then the idea is that all of that runoff comes down and you detain it on you know, a large basin area on the larger site. The new approach is what's called low impact development. Some of you may have heard of that. It's LID is how we refer to it. And really the idea here is that it's small scale landscape-based approach that mimics nature. So the idea is to capture, treat, and infiltrate stormwater on site. And the idea here is that you disconnect the flow path. So it's that slow the flow. You've probably heard that term. But the idea is to try to capture water at its source, and it infiltrates into the ground. It then recharges the groundwater, but then it also slows that flow of water. And so this is the same one that you saw here, the same site, but it's just a different design. And so we're kind of moving towards this, a different approach to site design. And so what you see here is, you know, trying as much as possible to maintain the existing vegetation by clustering the lots. So you have smaller lots, and then ultimately, a reduced runoff of the water. But in addition to that, on each site, you'll have different kinds of design characteristics of each site where you can actually get infiltration on each of those lots as well. You still have some runoff, as you can see. You still have a basin down here, and you'll have some runoff. But the idea is to try to limit that runoff. So I just want to walk you through some examples. These are local examples we tried to use. So maybe you've seen them. This is curb cuts in Auburn. So when the city of Auburn did their streetscape improvements in the downtown area, they used a lot of LID features. So what you see here is the water is captured in this little landscaped area, and the idea is that you get the infiltration. Again, you get groundwater recharge, which is great considering the drought that we're in. But in addition to that, you get reduced runoff. Here again, this is Rood Center in Nevada City. This is a swale, a bioretention swale. Same sort of thing. The idea is to get the water treated in the swale before it runs off, so you reduce the runoff. Here's an example of pervious pavement. It looks a lot like impervious pavement, but you can see it infiltrates into the ground. Lake Tahoe, you're going to see a lot of examples in Lake Tahoe, mostly because these types of standards are already required through the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency. We also have, I think it's noteworthy to point out that we have developed a LID manual for the Tahoe area. It's just a guideline manual. It wasn't adopted by our board, but it does provide a toolkit for developers for developing in the Tahoe Basin area. And so you'll see here, again, pervious concrete, same kind of thing as the pervious pavement. The water will infiltrate. And then here, again, the retention swale. So the idea is to, again, slow that flow. And then here in Elk Grove, you can see a rain barrel. This is really unique. So this is, again, something that you can do on site. So right on your, a home site, really. You can capture the rainfall that comes off of your roof and then use that water to irrigate your landscaping. And then here again is a rain garden. Same kind of concept here is that you use the rainwater to irrigate the landscaping on your site. Here's some pervious pavement examples. This one's a little dark, but all three of these, the idea is for the water to infiltrate into the ground and recharge that groundwater and reduce stormwater runoff. And then a rain garden in, this is in West Sac. Here's another interceptor tree. Curiously, there was actually a segment on the news last night about these features in Sacramento and how they're helping with the drought in terms of trying to capture the water on site and really recharging the groundwater. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca to talk really about the permit, and then I'll summarize at the end and talk about next steps in the process and where we go from here, and answer any questions that you would have.
Thank you, Crystal. Good morning. I wanted to start with the permit. Placer County is an MS4, and I'm going to explain that. But based on the 2010 census data, the State Water Resources Control Board used that and determined that Placer County's unincorporated urbanized areas are subject to this general permit, and that we are an MS4. MS4 means a municipal separate storm sewer system, M plus 4 S's. So this is the actual permit. And just one section of it today is what I'll be talking to you about. It has to do with land development projects, the post-construction requirements. But the county is subject to all of the requirements in this state permit. We are covered under that permit. So we are a permittee, and as of July 1st, 2013, we became subject to this permit. Section E12 is the section that it's kind of spelled out here in some general terms, but that is the section that has to do with post-construction stormwater management program. Regulated project categories are defined in this section, and it goes on to cover the site design measures, source control measures, low-impact development design standards, Hydra modification measures, and then O&M requirements. This flow chart helps to determine the permit implementation levels. Smaller projects, see if I can, oh shoot, sorry. There we go. Smaller projects, 2,500 to 5,000 square feet of impervious surface, that they're proposing only that much more impervious surface. They're only subject to site design measures and to reduce runoff. Most projects we see are bigger than that. So if there's 5,000 square feet of impervious surface or more, it's a regulated project. And those projects are subject to all of these requirements. If it's a bigger project, 1 acre or more, and we do have plenty of projects in that category, they are subject to Hydra modification management. And that includes the site design measures, source control, runoff reduction, stormwater treatment, and then also this, this requirement that post-project flows do not exceed pre-project flow from the 2-year 24-hour storm. And I'll get to that more in a little bit. But all projects are subject to annual summary and certification of compliance submitted to the State Water Resources Control Board. SMARTS is the online system that the state board has for reporting, and it stands for the Stormwater Multiple Application and Reporting Tracking System. There's a lot of acronyms in water quality.
Question, if I could.
Sure.
Who does the reporting on the certificate of compliance? Is that something that whoever does the development is going to be retaining an engineer for life now? And
It's, well, a little bit of both. It's on the county to do the reporting because we are the permittee, but we have the applicant or the developer or, you know, the project owner report to us annually. And Mary can probably help me answer that later because Mary's the stormwater coordinator.
so this is a perpetual commitment to an engineer or something every time you do a project?
There's an ongoing reporting requirement in this permit. And it's a little difficult for us, the county, to do that, but we need to rely on the people that are actually operating their sites.
And that's state mandated.
Yes, it's in the permit.
Sometimes we tell them no.
So site design measures, these are listed in the permit. So these are the 8 things that are listed as site design measures. Every project has to choose at least one of these. And you could choose more than one. And these are pretty basic, really, because you'll see, you know, tree planting and preservation. A lot of projects are doing that. Preservation, if you keep an existing tree, you know, you've done that. So these are typically not difficult to do. There's more difficult things, green roofs. You know, we don't see many projects proposing that. But the intent of these is evaporation and infiltration, both of which reduce site runoff. Source control measures, these are listed in the permit. We've seen these before in the previous permit. Nothing really new here. These types of uses we were already requiring that they have certain BMPs for outdoor storage, for example, or if they're going to do vehicle equipment repair and maintenance, we have special certain BMPs that are standard to prevent water quality degradation. LID design. So this is newer for us, but so regulated projects are required to implement LID standards to reduce runoff, treat stormwater, and provide baseline hydro modification management to the extent feasible. These are the steps that are called out in the permit for projects to walk through and to show compliance with the permit. Site assessment comes first. They need to define the development envelope and protected areas for their site, identify areas that are most suitable for development and areas to be left undisturbed, concentrate development on portions of the site with less permeable soils, and preserve areas that can promote infiltration, limit overall impervious coverage, set back development from creeks, wetlands, and riparian habitats, preserve significant trees, replicates the site's natural drainage patterns. The next step is drainage management areas. Really, we've been doing that anyway. We ask for drainage reports. It's just said a little differently in the permit, but it's creating a map of your site and breaking it into small sub-watershed areas, and then taking the water from each area and figuring out ways to infiltrate, reduce that runoff piece by piece. Site design measures, source controls, we already talked about those, but the project would need to implement those into their design. These are all done at the early planning stage. And then last is stormwater treatment measures. After you've reduced the runoff as much as you can by going through all these steps, the remaining runoff you have left, you then treat through bioretention, infiltration on site, and there's the sizing for those BMPs is either flow-based or volume-based, and that's specified in the permit. So that's what the numeric sizing criteria is. They have to size it based on the permit requirements. Then, hydro modification management, kind of a big word that's thrown around a lot lately, so I thought I'd take a minute and kind of define it. Hydrology is the movement, distribution, and quality of water on Earth. So hydromodification, in general, means changes in a channel, which is a stream, creek, or river, associated with alterations in flow and sediment due to past or proposed future land uses. So hydromodification management is a more common term these days because degradation of the physical structure of the channel indicates broader impacts to many beneficial uses, such as water supply, water quality, habitat, public safety. So the goal is to reduce hydromodification and its effects in order to protect and restore the beneficial uses. So as in effect, July 1st in this year, just a few months from now, the county is required per the permit to develop and implement hydromodification procedures. That's why we're working on this manual. We have a consultant on board to help us put together this manual to guide developers in how to comply. As I said previously, the bottom line is that post-project runoff shall not exceed the estimated pre-project flow rate for the 2-year 24-hour storm. An operation and maintenance verification program is also required by the permit. So this is the template we're working on with our consultant team. Regulated projects greater than 5,000 square feet. We're having a consultant put this together to help guide developers through and walk them through these steps. And the end result will be more or less a report that will be created as they walk through the template. They'll be able to design their project, show us that they've gone through this template, implement LID where they can, and we will be able to say to the state that the project has met the requirement and they've attempted as best to the extent feasible that they've designed their project using LID. The plan will officially be called the West Placer Stormwater Quality Design Manual, and it will help the county determine compliance of development with this permit.
Rebecca, my question is, I get the part on new construction, but what about existing businesses in the county? Is this something that they're going to have to comply with, or are they working under a different thing? Because I know my only experience is going through Roseville's process, and I know the state first came out, and I mean they just sort of dumped on all businesses that you will comply with this within a certain time. And when it came up, I was down in Sacramento, and basically what they wanted first draft would have put me out of business immediately. Couldn't comply with it. And I just wonder what the county's workings with existing business, because I heard you mention, you know, like, not, you didn't say existing, but, you know, you were saying on development, you know, stuff that had already been developed and stuff. Is there like a timeline or something for compliance, or?
It's not retroactive on existing impervious surface, but it applies to new impervious surfaces being proposed. So there's redevelopment projects in some cases that come in and they already have a building and a parking lot, for instance, and they want to add to the building and add some parking area. If that exceeds a certain amount of impervious, they become subject.
Went in where it's piece by piece, but I know the original blush from the state was, didn't matter if you had 1 acre or 60 acres, you had to make the whole thing come into compliance, and then they sort of pushed that one out, but I didn't know what the county's effect on working with existing businesses, if they came in for a permit, as you just said, to modify one building if their business, or say redo a parking lot or add on to it, that it just covers that part that they're doing, but it doesn't, you know, affect the whole business.
I will say that there are a lot of other sections to this permit, and Mary Keller, being our stormwater coordinator, she may be able to answer that when we wrap up the presentation. The part I was just speaking to is the
New.
kind of the new land development projects, right?
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. I think we just have the one more slide.
So in summary, I just want to point out too again that this is a multi-jurisdictional effort. The intent is that this, the manual will provide kind of a toolkit for developers, but then also for, you know, the various different jurisdictions, and they can take different pieces out and modify or update their plans and their codes. And so it takes effect in July 1st, 2015. That's the intention. And then again, it's just the idea is to reduce those peak flows. The manual draft would be ready in late spring. And we have been outreaching to the community. We have formed a TAC. I am not the lead on this project. Our lead is actually out on maternity leave, so I'm helping her out. So I haven't been involved in the outreach piece. But we do have a technical advisory committee that consists of architects, biologists, developers, engineers, and so we have tried to engage the community. We had, I believe, one public workshop. Mary might be able to answer questions related to the outreach efforts, but we do continue to outreach. And then I just want to point out that ultimately, at the end, what this will result in is some changes to our code. So you're going to see some changes to the zoning code come forth at a later date as we carry these changes into the actual business that we do. So, any questions?
Just to be clear, you may have gone over this, but this is over 5,000 square feet.
Yeah, we can go back to that. Let's go back to that slide that Rebecca went over. Yeah, bear with me here. It was near the front. There. So it's basically, there's like a tiered approach in terms of the size of your project. So the 2,500 to 5,000 square feet, you have to have, and Rebecca help me out here, but I believe you just have to have some site design measures to that site. It's when you get into the 5,000 square feet where it's regulated. So we don't regulate the 2,000 to 5. Is that right, Rebecca?
They just have to choose a site design measure and then quantify their runoff.
So one site design measure gets a little bit more, as you get a little bit bigger, your project gets bigger, the requirements get a little bit bigger as well.
Okay, so the checklist that we just talked about would be on an over 5,000 square foot
Is that correct?
project. And I guess the other part of my question is, this would be any kind of project that requires what, a building permit?
Discretionary permit.
Huh?
A discretionary permit, so a land use entitlement. So these would be projects that would be coming before your commission.
Would it be administrative use permits?
The smaller projects would
Why don't
be,
you-
I'm sorry, so I should take that back. The smaller projects that don't come before your commission, that might go before our zoning administrator. If they're small enough, they'll have this level here of
If they have over 5,000
requirements.
square feet, then,
If they're under that, nothing. Is that right?
Well,
no, I'm saying over 5,000 square feet, and I guess there could be some projects that are less than an acre that would not need a conditional use permit, but they would require another kind of permit. Or maybe a condition of zoning. Would they have to go through the checklist if they're over 5,000 square feet?
I don't believe so. Mary, do you want to speak to that?
Hi, Mary Keller, Placer County. So they would only have to go through that process if they're creating new impervious surfaces. So like if there's a project that's over an acre, under an acre, but, they're just grading and they're putting a smaller house in or something, they wouldn't have to go
So it'd be impervious surfaces over 5,000 square
over
feet?
5,000 square feet.
Okay. And so the type of permit doesn't matter, it's just that
Right.
that one criteria?
Right,
Okay.
yes.
oh, well,
That impervious surface, that would be a driveway or a roof or anything?
Correct.
yeah, so
Regardless of the acreage.
if somebody came in and they were building a house and they got the permit, there's conditions that they have to meet for the impervious.
Right, they'd probably be under that
So they
site
have to
design
build it to
measure.
that. I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't specific that they have to go out and get a special stormwater permit. They just have to build it to the standards the states require.
Right, and in our design manual, there will be, you said
Yeah.
anything over 5,000 would have a checklist. There's actually a little checklist for those that are just a smaller. And now the design manual is set up, as you go through, the first section explains it all. The second section is for the site design measures. And so if it's a smaller project, they would stop there. And then the next section is for the 5,000 and up, and the next section for the over acre. So the more they have, the more they go through the manual and do the little checklist. But the manual will help assist the smaller projects in seeing, okay, this is what I have to do. There's a little calculator in there that's already built in. They just plug in their numbers, and it comes up with what they have to do.
Does this apply also, this manual, to city-type projects within city?
Every city, Lincoln, Loomis, Auburn, and Roseville.
That's what I meant.
Yeah.
The ones in the area all have to comply with this manual.
Yes, we're working on it together so we could be
Okay.
jointly doing it, with the exception of the city of Rockland, who chose not to participate.
Mary, is there currently a calculation that we used for impervious sort of offsets or mitigation, using, how much is being covered and what has to be addressed as far as, again, a mitigation? Is there something currently?
Currently, you have Placer County Stormwater Stormwater Management Manual that the Flood Control District uses so that they don't increase flows.
So there's not a, if you have so many square feet of impervious, you have to do, it tells you what you have to do currently.
Do you have that? Or just the Stormwater Management Manual?
It's not. So currently, it's not based on a certain amount of impervious coverage, but there is the requirement in the Stormwater Management Manual that depending on your location, you can't negatively affect a downstream property owner. So if you're putting in impervious surface and now your runoff is going to create more flow off-site, that peak flow can't increase from the pre-project to the post-project condition.
So is there going to be a calculation going forward? Because you're talking about trying to mitigate these on-site. And so there must be some kind of calculation that's taken into consideration of what the volume, potential volume on an impermeable,
Yes.
How much that's going to create.
Yes, that's built
And
into.
how do you address the issue of, like, we've had a couple of major storms this year, one in December and one just not that long ago, where extremely heavy rain events, and you could go over the potential of what you can contain on site.
Right.
And what happens if, during those events, you go off-site? Is there some
Right.
sort of penalty for that?
Not a penalty per se, but there's two things we're doing here. This is the state permit, really kind of water quality based, and the requirements are related to, in this case, say it's a more than 1 acre project, the Hydra modification, that's going to handle that 2-year, 24-hour storm. There's going to be a calculation for them to detain or retain that event. But then there's also, through design, we'll look at it through improvement plans, the Stormwater Management Manual, and we'll be looking at the 10-year and the 100-year event as well, as we always have. And we'll make sure that there's no downstream impact to property owners as a result of the project development based or with those design storms.
Okay, well, is there a calculation or is there anticipation of a calculation that says so much water can come in a period of time, let's say an inch over a couple of hours, and that there has to be retention based on that kind of a volume so that you can anticipate that? I mean, you can talk about 100-year events, but that may be over a matter of days. But if you have a concentrated rain event in just a couple of hours, you could go exhaust your ability to maintain it on site. So I'm just trying to figure out how much of a calculation are you going to use. I mean, you're going to ask for 150% of what you expect, or 200% of what you expect, and what volumes do you anticipate?
So the permit did specify sizing of the on-site EMPs, either flow-based or volume-based, and that is specified as the 85th percentile storm event, 2-year, 24-hour, 85th percentile storm event. So our consultants are helping pull all that data together for local rain gauges, rain stations, and coming up with the depth needed to treat, and then that's the max that has to be treated as a result of this permit. So beyond that, there'll be overflow provisions, as we do with all development projects. You know, if you've exceeded the on-site detention, we have them show a spillway. Where's it going to go after you exceed this? You know, if the event is bigger than the design event, and make sure that there's no impact to downstream properties as a result of that overflow.
I guess what I was getting at is how much can a developer expect that they're going to have to try to accommodate on site? I mean, to what extreme? To how far of an event are you anticipating?
It's that 2-year, 24-hour, 85th percentile. That's what they have to anticipate that they need to capture on site. Beyond that, it would flow off site.
All right, thank you.
Is there any other questions?
Can I answer the one question?
Oh, sure.
You had a question about the site design, and if you have an existing site, how much of that would be. We deal with this permit, the language in the permit, we have to meet what it states in there, and in that particular area, it didn't specifically state whether you had to treat all of it or part of it. So in our design manual, we have determined that we are going to treat all the new. We're not going to try and treat the existing if it wasn't redeveloped.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Give the public a chance to ask questions.
Any other questions? Questions on process? Engineering questions I can't answer.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I guess
Yep.
if that's it, I could maybe open it up. If anybody in the audience has any questions on this,
Okay.
if there's any interest. Okay, seeing none, I guess pretty well answered everything. And since it's a non-action item, just an update. Thank you.
We'll be back. Thank you.
Yeah.
Chairman Denayo, during this hearing, I was approached by an individual in the audience who had something to say during public comment. I think there might have been a couple people on items that are not on the agenda. Your commission already closed the public comment period, but if you wish to entertain opening it, you would have to vote on that to open it and consider those comments. And then the question, if you did that, would you like to do that Now or after the next item? If you were to entertain them at all.
Okay, since we are over time on this, we'll go ahead and do our next item and then ask the commission if they want to vote on opening up and if having comments afterwards.
That sounds good.
Okay, so with that, we'll go to our next item. Let George get us started on the Winery Ordinance.
Whenever you're ready.
We're set.
You're ready?
We're just waiting for you, George.
Gentlemen, George Rosonsco, Placer County Planning. Happy to be before you today for the 5th workshop on the Winery Ordinance. Just by way of background, what has happened since our last workshop, which was the 4th workshop on November 13th, 2014, where you had approved or given consent to a draft ordinance in concept to go forward to the max. And we were going to do that, and we were going to come back about this time with what the max had said about that ordinance in concept. After that workshop, staff was approached by the Vintners Association, who said, we applaud you reopening the Winery Ordinance, but what you have and you're getting ready to take to the max simply won't work for us. And we're like, we've been through a 4th workshop. We have a draft ordinance that's going to go to the max. You really have 2 options at this point. One, you can come to the max and plead your case, and when we go back to the Planning Commission, we can have a discussion about the items that you want. The second option that we gave to them is, if you'd like, you could go under public comment at the next Planning Commission, address the commission, and ask them if they'd like to have a 5th workshop. They did that. At the January 22nd meeting, they came under public comment. They essentially said, we're not happy with the Winery Ordinance and the direction it's going in. We would like to have a 5th workshop, and we would like to present our ideas to you and see if we can convince you to put those in the ordinance. So that's where we're at. So what I'm planning on doing today is I'm planning on just presenting. They have seven things that they would like to have addressed as part of this workshop and ask for them to be included in the Winery Ordinance. So with that, I'm just going to go over those 7 things. Feel free to stop me at any time. As you know, this is a workshop. So the 7 things that they would like to address, this is a broad overview. Definition of event, development and operational standards for promotional events, tasting facilities, noise regulations, temporary outdoor events, and zone districts. So the one I'm going to start with is probably the most controversial and the biggest one that you will have to deal with today, and that has to do with event versus promotional activity. Right now we have a definition of event that basically says it means a gathering of more than 20 people for 1 to 12 hours where the purpose is for fundraising, profit, or political, public, social, educational nature. So basically what it says is anytime 20 people, more than 20 people get together at a winery for any specific reason, that becomes an event. Anything less than 20 is just an activity that happens, and you can do as many of those as you would like. What the Vintners Association would like to propose is that it not be called an event, but they have promotional activities. So you have a promotional activity defined, and I don't want to read these into the record. They're in the staff report. So I'm just going to paraphrase them. But basically means an activity sponsored by the property or winery owner, an association, agricultural or winery owners, or similar organizations formed to assist industry in the area. Basically what it means is any activity that takes place on a winery is a promotional activity. Weddings, fundraisers, wine clubs, winemaker dinners, all promotional activities. Then they have subcategories under promotional activities, which is a routine activity, which is a promotional activity that is attended by less than 75 people at one time on a winery or its tasting room located on less than 10 acres, or a promotional activity that is attended by 100 people, less than 100 people on a winery located on 10 acres or more. And then a special activity is a promotional activity that's attended by 100 or less people at one time at a winery and tasting room located on less than 10 acres, or a promotional activity that is attended by 200 or less people at one time at a winery and or tasting room located on 10 acres or more. And what they have proposed, and this is the important part about the promotional activities, is that wineries, with regard to a routine activity, that they have unlimited ability to have routine activities throughout the year, as many as they'd like, as long as they fit within that definition of a routine activity. They would like to have 12 special activities that fit in the special activity definition, and then if they'd like to have more special activities, that they would need to get an administrative review permit for each one of those activities. So that's probably the biggest one. The second one...
George?
Yes.
Maybe as you go through these, like one, if you go back to that one,
yes,
it has, you know, the 20 people for 1 to 12 hours and stuff.
Yeah.
On your comment that they could have unlimited routine activities and
right.
stuff. Just for the audience and for our edification, maybe just say, as it's written now or proposed now and it's went through the max, that they can only have X number, or they can have unlimited if it's only the 20 people or whatever.
Okay, as the ordinance is written, the one that was approved in concept, what it would mean is you had an event, and if you had anything less than 20 people on a winery, that wasn't considered an event. So you could do that in unlimited amounts. If you had more than 20 people, it became an event and was subject to the ordinance that you either needed an administrative review permit or you needed to get a temporary outdoor permit. So that's really the difference. Now what they're asking for is under routine activity is those numbers, 75 people at one time on less than 10 acres, or 100 people on a winery that's 10 acres or more. That would be an unlimited thing. They would have the ability to do that throughout the year as often as they chose to. Then the next rung up would be a special activity, which is 100 or less people at one time on a winery that's 10 acres or less, or a promotional activity that is attended by 200 or less people on a winery that is 10 acres or more, and they'd be able to do that 12 times a year. Now, that's a lot to take in at one time, and we can revisit this. But essentially what it is the Vintners Association's proposal allows a lot more activity and a lot more people without a lot of discretion on the county's part.
Okay, but on the county's part, if they came in, you know, just doing the routine stuff under the way it's written now, they could still have any number of events, but they just have to let the county know and get the...
You mean under the way the ordinance is written now? No. They'd be allowed to get an ARP for 6 events, and we're coming up to this, but if the temporary outdoor event permit that we're going side by side with this was changed, they'd have the ability to get temporary outdoor event permits for 6 one-day events. So for a total of less than 20 unlimited, and then 12 events through the ARP and the temporary outdoor event permit process. So it's a substantial change, but they think this is what's appropriate for wineries at this point in time.
Okay.
Okay? And then as we move on, this is just, I'm more in the PowerPoint. I'm going to keep moving because this is just more about routine and special activities. The next one's about tasting facilities. This is substantially the same in the ordinance now. The ordinance as it's written now has the tasting room being allowed to serve by the bottle, by the glass for on-site consumption. The Vintners Association just asked us to make the language a little bit more specific with regard to the law. We say by state law. They wanted us to put in California Business and Professions Code. So it's really not much of a change. It's more of semantics and more detail-oriented. Excuse me. The next one, we have specific noise requirements that were, excuse me again, duplicated from the event ordinance that was just adopted for agricultural event centers. They believe it's too restrictive. 20 decibels, as we've discussed a lot as part of the event center ordinance, is very restrictive. It essentially puts people inside a building that doesn't let any sound out after a certain amount of time. So it's basically requires silence. The Vintners Association would simply like the Winery Ordinance to reflect that anywhere that there is a reference to a noise regulation, that it's simply be in compliance with our existing noise ordinance that we have on the books right now today, which is section 9.36, which would allow during the day essentially 70 decibels at the receiving property line for outdoor sound.
Say, George, just for clarification,
Yes.
the event ordinance that just went through is more restrictive than this?
It's more, it's the event ordinance that just went through is essentially the same as what's proposed in the Winery Ordinance right now. So it is more restrictive than our existing noise ordinance that we have throughout the county.
But what's being proposed here today is the same or less restrictive?
Than the event center.
Than the event center.
It would be less restrictive than what is in the event center. And they're asking that it just be consistent with our existing noise ordinance. So less restrictive.
You said during the day, 75
70.
or 70. What, is there a time that changes?
Yes, in the evening, and I don't have the exact time it changes, but it goes down to 65. And it can be slightly higher for a one-time spike, you know, like a gunshot or something. It might spike up higher. Hopefully no gunfire associated with these. Bad example. But so it has some provisions for a quick, you know, like a smack. And then there's 65 and 70 are just like a consistent sound. It would be like outdoor amplified music or something of that nature. So the next one would be, this is what I alluded to earlier. This is part of the vintners that's come up during conversations by the vintners when we were talking about events. It's also come up as part of staff. The ag commissioners also talked to us about it. So I put it in. It's not necessarily just a vintners thing. We're proposing as part of this zoning text amendment that we have a second zoning text amendment. Right now, our temporary outdoor event ordinance allows 2 temporary outdoor events, 3 days each. What we're proposing is that it be just 6 days worth of temporary outdoor events. Same amount of days, it's just that it would give them more flexibility that you could have 6 one-day events, 3 two-day events, you know, 1 3-day, and then 3 one-days. So it just gives more flexibility.
So with all these, with the temporary outdoor events and the other event, total, how many days can neighbors expect activity?
Based on the ordinance as it is written now?
What we're proposing.
What
they're asking for.
What the vintners are proposing? The vintners are proposing that in some instances, 75 or 100 people a day for an activity is unlimited. So 365 days a year. Probably not, that's not realistic, but that's what could happen. And then on the larger size events, and I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but up to 100 and the 200, the special activity, that could be 12 a year. And then beyond 12, you'd need to get an administrative review permit for each event that's of the special activity size. If you want, when I run through these, if we can go back.
And there's no limit on those they could apply for either? The administrative review permit?
Special events.
They're not proposing that there be a limit on those. These are essentially the zone district charts. I wanted to put these in, not necessarily at the vintner's behest, but they're very confusing. We have basically 3 little charts in the existing ordinance, and they use the greater than, less than signs. I'm a planner, and I'm not a math whiz, and those things always confuse me. So I've reorganized the charts. Essentially says the same thing to something that's much more usable in the ordinance, easier to read. I have taken out greater than, less than signs. Is everyone? I don't know about you. I personally get confused. Is that greater or less than, you know, the little Pac-Man sign, you know, that sort of thing. So this is just a redo of the chart. I also at the bottom, if you so choose, what would happen is there would be a routine and special activity section. But that's essentially it. Those are the changes. Those are the 7 changes. Staff does not have a recommendation about these. The Vintners Association said that they would be here and that they would talk to you about why these things are necessary. But I am here to answer any questions and clarify anything with regard to the existing ordinance or those proposals and how they would fit into the ordinance.
Yeah, I should know the answer to this one, but on the condition of zoning, there's a C with an underline and there's a C without an underline.
Right.
What's the difference?
Those have been added. Underlined has been added, and that's existing.
Okay.
So underlined things are new. Like in routine activity and special activity, you'll see everything is added. So everything's underlined. And then in a few other places, like the cleanup, we've allowed, for instance, in resort, that was probably the most substantial change. It was our previous ordinance was silent on that. However, there is a planning director's interpretation that said wineries could go in resorts. So I've changed the charts to reflect that wineries can go in resorts based on the planning director's interpretation. We don't have very much resort property. We have essentially, I think I had our GIS people pull it. I think we have 6 or 8 pieces in the entire county. I don't suspect that it will come up in my tenure here again. We have one now. I don't think it will come up again. But I wanted the charts to reflect that. Anything else, gentlemen?
Nope. Guess that's it. Thank you, George.
Thank you. Let me flip back to, oops, went the wrong way. I apologize. I'm going to put it back to the beginning. I'll leave it right here.
I guess I might have one more question just for clarification too, just to be sure on it. And let me see if I can find it here. Now we're eliminating the word event and talking about promotional activities.
Correct.
And so both the routine and special activity are promotional activities.
They're a subset, yes. It defines what promotional activities are, and frankly, they're just about everything that takes place on a winery, from weddings to fundraisers to winemaker dinners. So that's a promotional activity. The Vintners Association position is that anytime anyone comes onto our winery and they use our tasting room and they have events, that's promoting our product. So they call those promotional activities. And then they have 2 subsets, routine and special, under that further clarify numbers and size of wineries and amount of events that they could have with regard to that.
Yeah, so the main difference between routine and special is just the number of people?
Number of people and number of events. Routine is unlimited, special is 12 per year, and then beyond 12, you need an administrative review permit.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yep. I'll be right over there if you need me.
Okay. Thank you, George. Okay, if we have the representative from the Vintners Association like to come up and speak on this?
Good morning, gentlemen. My name is Phil Maddox. I'm the owner of Lone Buffalo Vineyards. And I'm going to speak to some of the kind of conceptual Did you have a question?
Yeah, maybe before it gets started, just for my benefit, you sort of came up after all this had gone through the max. We'd had a lot of hearings and everything, and I know I've seen a lot of the winery representatives here and owners and stuff in front of us, but at the max and stuff, I'm assuming that you have been in this process since it started?
Correct.
Uh-huh. Oh, okay. I just want to know how it came up to this point versus it sounds like you were in the process in the beginning, you know, trying to formulate this, you know, knowing what the process was.
Well, maybe I can explain a couple of things that
Why,
might,
you know,
might
why
answer.
change, you know.
Yeah, might answer your questions about that. This, as you all know, this process has been going on for some time. The original Winery Ordinance was enacted, I think it's 8 years ago now. And there's been a process going along with regard to modifying the Winery Ordinance, which essentially was initiated by the county planning department. The county came to us and asked, you know, is it working? And we basically said no, that's why nobody's complying with it. And what changes would you like to see? And that's the way the process started. And it was going along for some period of time, really up until the last November hearing before you, when some version of our recommendations was being included in the draft ordinance. And at that time, as I understand it, I was not at that meeting, I wasn't able to be there. As a result, pretty much of the event center ordinance that had been going sort of in tandem but not exactly at the same time, the planning commissioners expressed some questions about what's the difference between a community center and a winery, or an event center and a winery. And there were some substantial changes made in the direction of the whole process. And we felt that that was pretty much unwarranted because things had been proceeding along on one plane and all of a sudden we were in a total different one. At that point is when we said, well, look, we're going to have to revisit this thing and look at it again. And so that's what gets us to being here today. What I would really like to address and specifically is try to answer your question as to what is the difference between a winery and an event center. Because I think that's what's gotten this process, from our standpoint, pretty much off track. There's a fundamental difference between wineries, even wineries that want to be event centers, which is not all of us, and event centers. And I can't stress this difference enough because I think it's core to this whole confusion between the event centers and wineries. Wineries are an agricultural industry. Our primary product is an agricultural product. We grow grapes to make wine. That's an agricultural activity. It's the type of activity that is specifically mandated in the Placer County General Plan, that planning and our ordinances and everything else should encourage the preservation of agriculture in Placer County. Event centers, on the other hand, and I'm not making a judgment about whether one is better than the other, but event centers are fundamentally different. Their business is driven by events. They, as the county approved the event center ordinance, event centers in the agricultural zone are required to have an agricultural component. But it's just that. It's a component. It's a part, and the only requirement is that it be somewhat economically viable. Wineries, on the other hand, the events are the small part. The events are the small component of our primary activity. And at the state of the winery industry in Placer County if we're not able to have those activities. We're simply not going to survive. And that, in the long run, is going to be very much the economic opposite of benefit, the word escapes me right now, to the county. I think it's pretty well known that the winery industry is one of the primary economic benefits to the economy of the state of California. And as you look around the rest of the state and you start to divide it up into subgroups, it's of major economic benefit to those counties that have established wine industries. We spent a fair amount of time working with the planning department to try to come up with recommendations where we could balance everyone's interests. We believe we've done that in this situation and with these recommendations. Quite frankly, I think that we all know that Placer County is becoming more urbanized, less rural. Yet we still have a general plan that does mandate the encouragement of agriculture. I think you're going to find that probably of all the agricultural activities in the county, wineries are probably the last best hope for preserving that agricultural mandate. There's simply, if we're not allowed to do the minimal activities that we've proposed, we're not going to make it. I would also just want to bring up one other comment about the draft ordinance and the draft ordinance as it now stands. One thing that gets very confusing about this whole situation, and I could note it in some of your questions, is what's now allowed and what's proposed to be changed. I would remind all of you that our recommendations are a change to the existing ordinance. They are certainly a change to the last version of the draft ordinance, but that draft ordinance was never adopted by anyone. And there are some provisions in there that appear to me that are maybe slipping by the radar here that I just want to mention at this time because I think they need some further dialogue, certainly between the Vintners Association and the Planning Department. And I'm referring specifically to the provisions of access to wineries that are on private roads. The Vintners Association has never asked for any changes to the existing language in the ordinance, and that existing language has been working well for 8 years. When we previously went through this with the first ordinance, and for every discussion I've ever had with anyone from planning up until the last version that proposed some substantial changes, the county has always taken the position they did not have jurisdiction to regulate activities on private roads. And I think that what I would ask at this time, I would certainly be interested in talking to county council about that as to whether the language that's in the current draft is really, something that the county is capable of doing. I'm not right now bringing that up mainly is because it's kind of escaped everyone's attention here. We've been concentrating on activities or events, and I just want to bring out that I think this thing needs some more look, and it's certainly our intention to pursue that further with the county. I would just also sort of preemptively, I guess, since I'm the first one up here speaking, like to point out to the members of the Planning Commission, I'm sure you're going to hear the regular cast of characters that we hear at every one of these events. They're going to talk about bars and restaurants in rural areas. They're going to talk about DUIs. They're going to talk about all of those kind of things. This is the same chorus we've been hearing from these people for before the Winery Ordinance was enacted 10, 12 years ago. There's a lot of rhetoric there, There's not one shred of evidence. Certainly, what we're proposing right here is not going to allow a bar. It's not going to allow a restaurant. It's very clear that even if a winery wants to become an event center, and of course a winery could, they could apply for a MUP under the event center ordinance, they're still not going to be a restaurant, and they're not a bar. Those things are simply scare tactics that are used by these people to get people kind of upset and concerned about what's going on. What we propose here is not, any kind of radical change from what's actually happening out there right now. It's pretty much we want the winery ordinance brought into line with what is happening and what is not causing any complaints. With that, I thank you.
See, I have a question.
Yeah.
Phil?
Back.
Yeah, you're the initial spokesman, so I have a question for you, but
Sure.
There'll be more discussion on the topics, I'm sure. But the distinction between event centers and the winery ordinance, it's pretty much what you were addressing.
Correct.
And I guess one thing I'm wondering about here is, of course, we just went through the event center, and now that's in the code. And so, with the winery, I've always perceived wineries as being farm sales. If you have a fruit stand and you're selling mandarins, or if you make wine, you're selling wine. So you're really talking about farm sales. I get that concept. Event centers, just by the word event, implies events, which is a distinction that's pretty clear. But the ordinance that was promulgated here in the county requires in the agricultural zone fairly, in fact, quite extensive agricultural activity, and it requires it to be subservient to the event activity. And so I guess what I'm wondering, you mentioned that wineries that want to grow and become big can become event centers, but I guess what I'm seeing here are some definitions in what's being proposed in the winery ordinance that are maybe in many cases much less restrictive than what the current event center would require in terms of condition of zoning versus conditional use permit or a minor use permit, things like that, and noises and the amount of events and those types of things. So I guess, it kind of raises a question, at what point would a winery want to go through all the process to become an event center when basically they may have, or what's the distinction there? What would make them want to become an event center if somebody had a winery?
Well, Rich, I can't speak for all of the wineries. I think you have to go back to the fact that, and I will agree with you that what we're proposing here is less restrictive than what has already been imposed on event centers. But the reason for that, and that's what I want to stress here, is that this is an agricultural activity. Even an event center, even in the ag zone where it has some viable ag thing, that's not their primary business. And without the ability to engage in this minimal activity, and it is minimal. I think that I would at least commend you. I've seen you out in some of the tasting rooms, but I think I would encourage all of the commissioners to get out on the wine trail, visit us on a weekend, and see what's going on. These things that everybody is talking about are simply not happening. So, and it's certainly going to be a long time before the wine industry in Placer County is going to approach the level where some larger amount of regulation is necessary. From my standpoint, I have no desire to be an event center, and I think that's true of most of the wineries. There are 2 wineries, which I think you're aware. One of them already has a permit as an event center. I think his motivation was really he didn't know where the winery ordinance wasn't done, and he wasn't willing to wait. After this is done, other than, getting into a situation where you want to start holding concerts and be, something other than a winery, I don't see any reason to become an event center. And first of all, you've already put the conditions in place, if you have that desire, to ensure that you're not going to have the problems that the public is, or you're not going to impact the public more than is necessary. I mean, as we all know, none of this stuff can happen with no impact on anybody. And what we're all looking for is a compromise somewhere in the middle. We have worked extensively with the planning department, taken a lot of input from the planning department, and we feel we have reached what is something that will work for everyone.
Okay, thank you. George, I could?
Yeah, go ahead.
Talking about the restaurant issue here and looking at the food regulation portion, it says wineries may have a commercial kitchen, but it shall only be used in conjunction with on-site events.
Correct.
Well, now if the proposal is that we can have unlimited events as long as they're below 75 people, if I want to have a breakfast event, a lunch event, and a dinner event, how am I not a restaurant?
Is that rhetorical, or do you want?
Well, I mean, obviously, because right after it says restaurants are not allowed. So how do we draw this distinction and offer some certainties to neighbors who are concerned and to winery operators who say they don't want to be in the restaurant business?
Well, what I would tell you is if you did choose to follow the Vintners Association's recommendations, that some other guidelines might need to be fine-tuned. If you don't want them to be a restaurant, we would have to also go and look at the food regulation section and make sure that you're not a restaurant, because you could have 75 people there and you could have a
Buffet.
A kitchen, and you could serve food.
If it walks like a duck?
That would be something that we would need to look at.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Maura Rowe. I'm the Executive Director for the Placer County Visitors Bureau. And I would like to speak, I think it's a nice segue. There was a point made that the wineries are promoting their product. I would like to speak a little bit on behalf of some of the events that the Visitors Bureau would like to have at the wineries. Would not necessarily be promoting the individual wineries, but Placer County as a whole. And because I'm known to rant, I kind of stuck to my 3 minutes. So I'm just going to be really quick and read kind of the perspective from the Visitors Bureau. In recent years, travel and tourism has proven to be one of America's most productive engines for economic growth and job creation. At a time when leaders at all levels are searching for solutions to sluggish growth, unemployment, globalization, and continued economic challenges, tourism is proving to be a valuable investment. Tourism and travel is a top California industry, no less important than high-tech, agriculture, or Hollywood. The travel and tourism industry generates more than $100 billion per year in revenue for California businesses. California has the largest tourism market than any other state. In 2012, 15.7 million people visited Sacramento, which generated $2.7 billion in travel-related spending. Leisure and hospitality is the number 3 employer in Placer County, with 18,700 jobs, a 21.4% growth over the last 10 years. Leisure and hospitality is projected to grow 24.4% by 2017 and 29% by 2022. In October of 2013, Placer County Visitors Bureau launched Destination Placer, an assessment of our area's assets and resources. We determined that one of our premier marketable assets lies in our abundance of agricultural and culinary resources. We are not alone. I arrived home last night from Visit California's Outlook Forum, California's premier marketing conference, where I learned of incredible partnership opportunities with both Visit California and Brand USA. There are boundless opportunities to elevate the Placer brand and to have significant relevance in today's tourism marketplace. Our wineries and other agricultural resources play a vital role in these strategies. When it comes to culinary experiences, from farm tours, farmers markets, farm-to-fork dinners, food and wine festivals, and wine tasting tours, California is always top of mind for all consumers. The fastest growing travel sector is culinary connoisseurs, and each year nearly 20 million tourists visit wine regions throughout the state of California. Many of those travelers are international visitors who want to explore firsthand California's diverse areas while enjoying the wines, cuisine, and cultural offerings of California's signature industry. A quote from Visit California's Gold Country promotional materials: "The Gold Country region is emerging as a new discovery for wine lovers, and visitors are striking it rich with liquid gold. Considered one of the oldest wine-producing areas in California, with a renaissance in the growth of premium vineyards and wineries. They are producing countless varieties of celebrated wines. Today, these small family-run wineries are becoming fast favorites among wine lovers and competition judges alike. This is a time to be fearless and innovative, to work together to find solutions so that Placer County can position itself in the front of these trends. Making changes to the ordinance will provide our wineries and tourism partners more flexibility to develop special events that will not only attract more visitors, but to help position Placer County as a premier California destination." For us, one of our main, we bring FAM tours, familiarization tours, of large groups into Placer County. And one of the special things that we can offer is visits out to the wineries. So I would like to see some flexibility so that we can bring European visitors, journalists, and others to enjoy our wine regions. I'm a longtime resident. I've been living here since 1972. And, you know, I hear the noise thing, and I haven't experienced it. You know, my parents live out in rural Lincoln, and I don't see, you know, we have cycling, and you'd hear a lot of people say that cyclists, there's too many cyclists on our roads right now. These are all positive benefits. You're out, I did the San Francisco Travel and Adventure Show recently, the LA Travel and Adventure Show, and again, Outlook Forum. You have European travel operators who are interested in something different than Napa and Sonoma, and we're being looked at. So I would just like to take the opportunity to ask that you be flexible and to help the tourism industry out, because I think Placer County is in a great position to benefit from it.
Okay, one quick question.
Sure.
You bring these large groups in. Exactly, is it like one bus that's driving around to each of the wineries?
Yes, so a chartered bus, correct.
Okay,
And so
people?
well, it all varies. So in
maximum on a bus.
I can't say a maximum because we're just developing products for tourism now. So we have, in May, we have 25 CWC, which is the California Welcome Center managers, coming in with Visit California. They'll not only be going to the wineries, but they'll be going out to Twin Peaks and also visiting some of our other 100-year-old farms.
Okay, and then how long at each stop do you usually go?
An hour, a couple of hours.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Is it public comment?
Yeah.
Oh, you didn't open it up.
Oh, yeah.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Commission. I'm Kevin Hanley. I'm CEO of the Auburn Chamber of Commerce, and we represent over 500 small businesses in the greater Auburn area. The Board of Directors took a position to support with the Vinters, their recommendation and their direction in reforming the Placer County Winery Ordinance. We believe, as we look at the proposal by the Vinters Association, that it is consistent with the general plan. And the general plan wants to protect the long-term economic development of local agricultural lands. We believe that the Placer Wine Trail is one of the most valuable assets going from Auburn to Lincoln. It's a great tourist destination. It's a great place for local residents. And we are concerned that because it takes 10 to 15 years to make a profit from owning a small winery, that if the county does not allow these small business owners to make a decent living from working hard on their wineries, that these beautiful working lands will disappear. They will change. And we believe it's obligation of the Planning Commission and the board to try to promote this great use of local resources. Staff has already told you when comparing Placer County Ordinance to Amador, Sacramento, Santa Barbara, that the Placer County Ordinance is more restrictive than those counties. And even in the case of selling wine by the glass or bottle, you're more restrictive than state law. And so that should be changed. Amador has 4,000 acres in wine cultivation, vineyard cultivation. El Dorado, 2,500. Placer County, 211. This proposal by the Placer Vendors Association is modeled on the Sacramento Winery Ordinance. I don't see a lot of complaints from Amador, El Dorado, Sacramento, that somehow these wineries are acting like restaurants and overwhelming their communities. These are small business owners. They have limited staff. It's usually the family. So they're not going to automatically turn into these huge restaurants. That's not the case in other places in California. So we ask that you take that into consideration. As a city council member serving on Auburn for 12 years, I often face similar situations that this commission is facing and the Board of Supervisors about resources, limited resources to do code enforcement. And the way I see it is too much effort is made in trying to define what an event is, too many delays in administrative permits. Administrative sources, your county resources should be focused on enforcing the noise ordinance. Decent things, reasonable provisions to protect the quality of life in the rural areas like the noise ordinance. That's where the focus should be. And I believe that if you enact the Venters recommendations and allow them to make a good living with their hard work, you're going to have fewer enforcement problems. They're going to comply with the law, and they'll be able to make some money on those vineyards, and I think it will ease the enforcement problem. So I think this is good public policy, and I ask you to look at and supporting these recommendations. Let's get it to the MAC. Let's get it to the process. We want Placer County to be a premier destination for the wine trail and our local agriculture. So we ask you as the commissioners to support this positive recommendation. Thank you.
Okay, at this point, we're going to make sure everybody just stays on a maximum of a 3-minute comments.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make just a little comment right now. I've got a previous engagement. It's a doctor's appointment that has been set up for many weeks. I'm going to have to leave around 12 o'clock, so I just thought I'd mention that a little bit early before I walked out unannounced.
Okay, thanks, Rich. Okay.
Good morning, Chairman. I'm disappointed to hear that the public comment now is limited to 3 minutes when Mr. Maddox had a full 10 minutes. I don't feel that's fair representation.
Okay, well.
And I'd like to point out to Mr. Maddox that I am not a cast of characters, that I have been in this since the beginning, and it does in fact exist. You guys have heard my complaints. So I was going to play clean today, but when Mr. Maddox referred to me as a cast of characters, I highly offended. I'm participating in the democratic process, and if he considers that a cast of characters, shame on him.
For the record, could we just get your name?
Lori Lewis. I live at Wise and Gold Hill Road. I urge the commissioners to vote no on this 7-item wish list. The public, the county, everyone has worked several years in good faith to come up with a compromise. Now that we're at the last where the paper is going to hit the print, they want to change it all. I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's dealing in good faith. Item number 1, the issue of all the different type of events. Me, as a neighbor to several wineries, how am I going to know which event it's going to be? Is it going to be the promotional? Is it going to be the special? How am I to determine if the winery is violating 75 or 100 people, because the county's not going to keep track of this. They're not going to be required to file permits for all these special things. To me, it's so gray that it will not be enforceable, which does not protect my property rights. And the noise does still exist. So that concerns my issue. It clouds the definition for the county enforcement, which through this whole ordeal, I have been guaranteed that there will be enforcement. Now the vintners are coming in and saying, well, we don't want to make it definitive because then you can't catch them. Item number 5, if a winery is required to get a permit, that's a big word, not shall, not will, but is required. Then we can do a noise ordinance. But if they're not required to pull any of those permits, I have no enforcement because there's no requirement. So, minimal activity? No. I still have loud music on the winery. The door is rolled up. They've tried to be quieter, but I still hear it. I was down gardening at the end of the driveway. The traffic on the weekend is crazy. But my main concern is enforcement and the noise. I am so disappointed with the vintners coming now and saying, okay, we don't want to play anymore. This is what we really want. I'm going to stay within the time limit. Gentlemen, please stick with what the county, the taxpayers, have paid the county to do. We owe it. You owe it to us as the people that participated in the local government. You owe it to George for all his time that he put into this. We're ready to put it on paper, and now the vintners want, no, we don't want to do that. That's not fair play. Thank you, gentlemen.
Hi, I'm Mike Walker with Bear River Winery. I want to submit this into record. Dear Honorable Commissioners, please accept the attached petitions that were gathered by wineries on the Placer County Wine Trail during the Valentine's Day weekend. Our wine trail is visited by both local members of the community of Placer as well as tourists from other locations throughout Northern California. Those signing the petition are supportive of our efforts to conduct business activities that will provide them with an opportunity to enjoy our local agricultural region, specifically activities at our local wineries. This represents a significant contribution to our local economy and reflects positively on the reputation Placer County enjoys regarding our agricultural heritage. We are not aware of any complaints filed or any incidents that occurred over that weekend. Once again, may we ask that you consider this response from over 200 of our visitors as evidence that we are sincerely pursuing our collective success in branding Placer County as a viable wine region in California. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Marshall Davis. I'm the owner winemaker at Davis Dean Cellars in Lincoln. I'm actually in the city, so I don't fall. I don't fall amidst all of some of this, but I intend to grow. And in order to grow, we need to have some flexibility. If you inhibit growth, you inhibit the prosperity and the future prosperity of Placer County and its brand name. And that's about all I have to say. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think so.
Good morning. My name is Marilyn Jasper. I'm speaking on behalf of the Sierra Club and Public Interest Coalition. We are not opposed to wineries, but A high priority is to preserve residential, agricultural, and farm lands and protect them from incompatible uses, which will lead to their loss via de facto conversion to commercial uses. The Placer County Vintners Association changes are unreasonable on many levels, a few of which are described in both our February 23rd letter correspondence to you and the correspondence, the addendum that is being passed around right now. We urge you to not accept the changes and instead direct staff to stay on course with the circulation of the neg deck. Barring that option, the only fair and equitable or legitimate action is to incorporate for review all the suggestions that were presented, that were created by public comment, by the MACs, and by the Ag Commission, especially the ones that had the common threads that were somewhat ignored in the final draft. We ask you to not put the burden of subsidizing wineries and breweries, they're going to be coming, on the backs of citizens living in res ag farm zones. I heard them mention there's not one shred of evidence. Well, with track records of complaints, of non-compliance, all topped with a grand jury report, I don't know what more evidence is needed. And any talk of assurances, don't worry, none of that will happen, via code enforcement has been, and as far as we know, is meaningless. The new spin word, activity, promotional, routine, special, temporary, an event is an event is an event. Another word that's in the plan, temporary overflow parking. That's an awful lot like a buzzword for no control over the number of attendees. There has been an exaggerated threat made that if wineries are not economically viable, they will sell out and ag lands will be lost. However, with unlimited events, by right, with no permit needed, number one, there's no guarantee that wineries and breweries will be profitable, but it's also most likely that neighbors will be the ones to sell out to get away from the entertainment nuisances. Ag land losses are determined by the votes of any three supervisors and a lack of code enforcement. I will stop there, but there's a lot more. Thank you.
Hi there. My name is Charlie Green, and I am the ex-owner of Green Family Winery, who you may or may not have heard of just recently gone out of business. The bank owns it now because I couldn't make enough money to pay the mortgage. One thing I think the county really ought to consider is a change in the enforcement of farm zoning. I can't go into an industrial zone and build a house because it's non-compatible, and I can't do it in a commercial zone. So I don't see why they let people who have no interest at all in farming to move into a farm zone and then complain about the farming. It's just not compatible, as they proved by some of the comments here today. They don't like to be around farming and the flies, noise, traffic, and whatnot. And that's about all I got to say here, and adieu. You won't be seeing me anymore.
Okay, if anybody else is going to speak, please sort of line up so we can move a little faster.
Yeah, my name's Carol Rubin. You've heard from me before. I'm speaking on behalf of Placer County Farmlands. I'm sorry, Safe Placer Farmlands, and I live in Newcastle. I would also like to join Ms. Lewis in objecting. I would hope you would indulge me and allow me to refute Mr. Maddox's comments for at least the amount of time he was allotted. I will try to be much briefer, but I do want to address some of the points that he was trying to make on behalf of the vintners. This is a process that should be open to all the citizens of Placer County, and right now the vintners are driving it. My remarks and Save Placer Farmlands concerns are limited to residential and agricultural zoning. In fact, we encourage the development of these kinds of commercial entertainment facilities in commercial and industrial zoning, but the farm zoning is ground zero for the kind of battle that we're fighting here. I want to remind everyone that the number one reason the previous changes were made to the draft that was circulating before by planning was because you had requested to make this developing winery ordinance compatible with the provisions of the event center ordinance. And that's where the changes come from. It's not because us radical cast of characters are driving them. Mr. Maddox says that the difference between a winery and an event center is that the wineries are an agricultural industry and their number one product is the ag product, but that their proposed regulations don't reflect that. What they're proposing is that if I grow 1 acre of grapes on a 5-acre parcel, I can have unlimited events with up to 100 people and cover as many acres as I wish of the rest of that 5-acre parcel with temporary overflow parking. Once you grade and have cars parked on a piece of property, it's going to be awful hard to turn that back into farmland. This is not preserving agricultural lands, which we have heard the vintners make that argument over and over again. This is turning them into a commercial, non-agricultural activity. And I'll tell you, those subdivisions that they always threaten us with are looking mighty, mighty appealing compared to what these guys are proposing. Their proposal doesn't indicate that grape growing is the primary activity on this property. Entertainment is the primary activity on these properties. Or they would propose regulations that would ensure more of the property was actually under cultivation. The comparison has been made to other cities and counties in the number of acres that wineries have and their production. As Mr. Rosasco has said, Placer County will never be Amador or Sonoma County because our parcels are too small and broken up. You're going to have considerable consolidation before we'll ever have that kind of production. And that's the real reason that people like Mr. Green are going out of business. It's not because his neighbors are upset with him or anything. It's because the parcels, I think, are too small to make this pay. Mr. Maddox says that he believes the vintners have balanced everyone's interest. Please, let us speak to that. That's really offensive for them to claim that they speak for us. The private roads issue, he says, where did that come from? Again, that came to make the winery ordinance compatible with the event center ordinance. If you allow this, if you allow these guys to come back in and hijack this process, 2 years that we spent doing that event center ordinance, gone. Because, as Mr. Johnson has said, who wants to be an event center when you can get it all and have a winery? You just have to cross out the event and call them activities. Not one shred of evidence that these are bars or restaurants. We've had the Goat House Brewery situation. It's a bar. They're open. They serve beer to people and all day long. Restaurant, Wiseville Winery. Oh, he calls it a bistro, but that's the same thing as the duck test. If it walks like a duck, right? It's a restaurant. He has people serving it for dinner. Complaints. Ms. Jasper has alluded to the fact that there was even a grand jury report saying, look, the winery ordinance has to be fixed because the opportunity for complaints and problems is too great. Mr. Maddox says, well, maybe somebody would want to be an event center so they could hold concerts. Under their proposal, they could hold concerts anyway because it would be considered a promotional activity merely because it's happening at a winery. So it makes no sense. They get to do anything. They get to have drag races if they want, because it's happening at a winery. So it's a winery promotional event.
Carol, can you?
Yeah, I'm wrapping up. One more point. They say they're looking for compromise. That's words. What they have indicated was that the compromise that was going through wasn't working for them, and so they've attempted to dial back the process to zero and throw out all the 14 months of work. And I ask you, this is the kind of thing that gives people a cynical attitude about special interests controlling the planning process in this county. And thank you very much for your indulgence.
Okay, anyone else, please line up. And so
Morning, gentlemen. My name is Kevin Stevenson. I own Cask Wines. I also currently serve as the president of the Placer County Vintners Association. Just want to make a couple quick points, reiterate essentially and explain what George has already put in his discussion of the issues, just so we kind of know exactly what we're asking for. Let me give you a couple examples. Everybody calls it a buzzword. Routine activity is special activity. That's not a buzzword. That's what we do now. This is what is going on. A routine activity, if I get a phone call and somebody says, my grandpa's turning 75 next week and the family wants to get together and there's 30 of us, can we use your tasting room and your lovely patio and have a picnic for a couple hours? It's going to be on a Tuesday. I know you're not open. Can we do that? And maybe we'll give you $100. And I'm going to say, okay, but you're going to give me $100 because I'm going to have to pay somebody to be there to monitor it. What you're really going to do is you're going to buy a minimum amount of wine, because that's what I'm in the business of doing, selling wine. Without selling wine, I don't build my market. Nobody comes to a party, drinks my wine, buys bottles when they leave, potentially joins my wine club, amen, and then goes out and tells their friends and family and neighbor, hey, what a great winery, you guys should go visit that. These are promotional activities. You want to call them an event? Is that an event when Grandpa Joe turns 80 and his family has a birthday party and it's on my property when I'm not normally open for tasting? You can call it whatever you want, but I'm telling you, this goes on all day long, all week long. It's about, I'll tell you, 20 to 25% of my business. It has way less impact than when I'm open Friday, Saturday, Sunday for general tasting. Nobody ever knows it happens. Family shows up and I have ample parking. That's the kind of thing we're talking about. Happens all the time. Without that, I'm out of business in a couple of weeks. 25% of my business. I hope someday it's zero, because I'd like to build my wine club and my normal tasting room business to the point where that can be the case. That is not the case. Number two, special activity. That's exactly what it is. It's that same kind of activity, only it's kind of special because I'm asking to have a few more people be allowed to come 12 times a year. I don't want to hold concerts. I can't have drag races. I want to be subjected to a noise ordinance. Those activities are things like, I have several hundred wine club members. So over 2 days, maybe I'm going to hold an open house so they can come visit and pick up their wine club shipment. Now, I do that 3 times a year. Some wineries do it 6, some do it once a month. That's where that number 12 came in. It's not so we can have 12 weddings a month at 200 people. I don't know why anybody in their right mind would go through that absolute hassle and frustration and pain and agony of getting a winery license just to hold an ordinance, or just to hold events. It's insane. I'm going to make one other quick comment and then I'll shut up. The reason we came back to the Planning Commission to request that we have this last workshop was because what happened in the last draft of the Winery Ordinance took us so by surprise, and we were shocked. Now, I'll be the first to fall on my sword and say, I wish I'd been more involved in the MAC process. But in my defense, and I think I'll speak for just about everybody that owns a winery, when that went through the MAC process, I'm working 100 hours a week. This week I'll work 80 and I'll work 7 days a week. This is my slow time of year. You want to have MAC meetings and have us attend them? I have no way to make those MAC meetings. And I also think that we felt like the process was going along pretty well. We had a pretty good ordinance shaping up, and all of a sudden we sort of got blindsided by with what came out. And again, I'll follow my sword, but I guarantee you going forward, if this goes back out to the MACs, you will hear from us, and you will have plenty of supporters, and we'll stand up for what we think is a perfectly reasonable request. And this will get tweaked, I know. But my understanding is, and I talked to county yesterday, 0 complaints were filed against wineries in 2014. A handful have been filed in the past against wineries, not event centers, wineries. A handful have been filed in the past primarily against one winery, and it's been noise related. Evidently, that is continuing. I welcome a noise ordinance, and I welcome the added enforcement which county evidently is going to have, because as president of the association, it makes all of us look bad if 1 or 2 wineries are not in compliance. I welcome that, because I want happy customers and I want happy neighbors. It's the last thing I want is an angry constituency surrounding my winery or tasting room. Thank you. Sorry I went over.
I think I'm probably the last winery, and this got to her afterwards, or copies of my notes. I am going to go over, but Mount Vernon Winery and Pawsaw Winery have yielded me their time. My name is Tina Wilkins. I'm the co-owner and managing partner of Viña Castellano Estate Vineyard and Winery in North Auburn, currently producing 2,000 cases of wine, and I custom crush to stay in business wine for 2 wineries in Napa and 1 winery in Nevada County. And my hope is someday that I use my facilities to only make and sell my own wine. My personal local vendor list includes 52 small businesses in the Sierra foothills. These are people I pay for service. Additionally, I'm a vendor for 25 restaurants and wholesale outlets from Tahoe to Roseville. Add to it the other 18 wineries vendor lists, and you'll see that we are starting to make a real fiscal impact in our region. We offer real opportunity for business development for ancillary hospitality and farming businesses that are not yet here. Glass, cork, capsules, chemicals, gases, and many other things are not yet available to me here in Placer County. I have to go outside of the county to get those. Those are real avenues for business development here. Bed and breakfast, overnight accommodations as a whole are too limited. We have a lot of restaurants, but there's room for more. And there's room for growth in after-hour, non-winery related entertainment as well. In other words, what happens in the farm zone does not need to and should not stay in the farm zone. We are nowhere near critical mass on our trail. If you allow us to thrive, so too will other businesses that support our needs and whose support we need. While our customer base has been slowly growing over the past decade, I've been open for 14 years, Mount Vernon for 15, even during the worst economy of my lifetime, it's grown. It's not enough to get me into a truly profitable place, nor is it enough to make this a business that I would turn over to my children. That is the reality that you need to be thinking about. I and 16 of the other wineries in this room cannot afford 20 employees and the other commodities it takes to be a standalone, viable business. And I would argue that none of the other wineries in this county could exist, or if one or more of their family members were not the primary financial provider. That is not the reality of all regions, and contrary to popular belief, it does not have to be true here. We are and we can be a viable industry if you give us the tools. It's important to mention that recently many of our wineries, including myself, have been winning extraordinary awards. When you hear the term Best of Class from the San Francisco Chronicle or Best of California from California State Fair, that means that those wines beat out every other wine contested from every other region, including Napa and Sonoma. Those are some of the most prestigious awards given nationally. We're winning them. What's important about that? Well, for me, the most important element of winning awards of that caliber is the knowledge that every drop of wine that I produce is pressed from fruit grown on that me and my family grew on our property in Placer County. In order for me to remain viable, the large majority of that wine needs to be sold direct to consumer from my property. Those awards are proof that we have what it takes to be a meaningful participant in the multi-billion-dollar California wine industry. But you have to give us the tools we need to compete, not just in contests, but in regional sales as well. If you don't give us what we need, it will be indeed death with a butter knife. Charlie is proof of that. Ophir Winery is proof of that. Rancho Roble Winery that just sold is proof of that. If we don't have the right venues and tools to sell the wine, the production of those wines cannot be sustained. We need real and meaningful support from our local government, not lip service. If you don't allow people to come and experience our world-class wines on site and through unique promotions that are part and parcel to our industry statewide, this community's world-class wines will go away, and we will once again dwindle to the classification in the eyes of our customers as hobbyists. It will be our death. Customers want to taste and enjoy wines in the manner in which they are accustomed in our neighboring and competing regions. In California, small wineries sell their product by selling their story first. They sell wine by selling the experience. They sell wine by selling the dream. Have you ever watched a California tourism commercial? They always feature a winemaker in the field, not in a commercial-looking tasting room in town. They're selling a trip to the farm, an experience. The growth of the trail system and getting people out on the farm has lured people from outside the area in. If we don't give them an experience and entertain them, they won't come back. Every successful wine region in California started with one common thread: ease of regulation for farming and on-site sales. If Napa had to develop with the same regulations that Napa has today, Napa would be San Jose. That's not a threat, that's reality. If Amador and El Dorado had to start with the regulation that they have today, they would not be in existence either. Now is not the time to limit us. Now is the time to give us the tools to compete. I'm asking you today to not look at what we are, but look at what we could be. Look at what we could be if you support our needs. And conversely, look at what we could be if you don't. Look at the one-time farming communities of Lincoln and rural Roseville, or as I like to call it, Del Webb Farms. Trust me, I would much rather have the income from farming retired people than from farming grapes. But I would have lost a beautiful part of our culture, agriculture. I'm asking you to help grow our livelihoods, and we will share. In the last 6 years, I've poured from my tasting room, actually 5 years, it's a typo. I've poured from my tasting room or donated to charity nearly 18,000 bottles of wine. For me, that's a year's worth of production. Why? To attract people to our region, as well as to give back and create value beyond my own existence. There are 17 other wineries that do the same. I'm aware that there's a small and fearful minority who can't or won't tolerate the minor nuisance that comes with wineries, and yes, there will be noise. But what are they giving you in exchange for cutting our business, killing our business? I ask that in seriousness. Their arguments are arguments of fear, not reality. The complaints to the county in 2014 were non-existent. Kevin gave you the rest of those things. You can check with George to make sure we're not lying. The answer is not to regulate working farmers out of using their property for farming to appease a problem that's negligible. The commercial farm zone is unapologetically supposed to be, by design, just that, commercial, albeit rural. You know what it's not? It's not country residential, or as we call it in Placer County, ag residential. That's where non-farming residents rightfully have precedent. If you support the idea of the true farm zone, including a true wine region, you need to codify what is already happening at the existing ranches and give us tools for growth. The large majority of the wineries have regular operating hours of about 10 hours per week. The rest of us, I think there's 5 of us, are open 20 hours or less. That is not enough time to sell enough wine to sustain any kind of real commercial infrastructure, particularly given our rural location. It's sure as heck not enough time to secure the kinds of loans it takes to build some of the infrastructure that I know is desired by the county. In one department, they're telling us that we need to slow down or cut back, and in what we need, cut back what we need. And in other departments, we're getting the message that we need to grow up. Over the past 15 years, something awesome has surfaced, and we now have a viable year-round commodity that's easily sustainable, in high demand, and has a built-in audience. But the key to its success is not selling it wholesale. Ranches of that size available in Placer County do not produce the yields that it takes to make restaurants and retail outlets a main and viable sales avenue. Those outlets are good for brand identity or promotion, but not for earning a living. We started too late to grow into that branch of the industry, but it's not too late to help us save the agricultural industry in the county via small farms and agro-tourism. The body, the entity, the thing that will allow wineries to flourish in Placer County is agricultural tourism and a meaningful farm and winery trail system. We've begun that process. Ag tourism is defined by the state as a commercial enterprise at a working farm, ranch, or agricultural plant conducted for the enjoyment or education of visitors and that generates supplemental income for the owner. Agritourism can include farm stands, shops, you-pick farms, farm stays.
Can you
I'm almost
remind
done.
that because
I'm almost
actually you've
done.
gotten off.
Okay. Winery weddings, orchard dinners, youth camps, barn dances, hunting or fishing, guest ranches, and much more. Tasting rooms are ancillary entities to boutique wineries, and they have to have them to be sustainable. Ag tourism is part and parcel to most small wineries as well. All promotional activities are ag tourism. Wineries, as well as other farming entities that wish to be viable, standalone, responsible, and multi-generational businesses need to have those opportunities. Wineries my size in Amador County get 52 events a year. We're foolishly asking for only 12. I'm willing to open up my books to you commissioners individually so you can see the real numbers. And I think it's important for you to know that we've actually limited, many of us have limited our businesses for fear of growth. Thank you.
Okay, is there anyone else that would like to speak? Seeing none, I'll cut it off. Thanks, Rich. Okay, George.
So, gentlemen, let me get to the next steps. Take me a second. Okay, so what staff is hoping today is we would like to prepare a revised draft ordinance or use the existing draft ordinance that we have, whatever you decide here today. We want to do that in March. We'd like to prepare the environmental document in March as well for the ordinance. We need to go out to the max. We like to do that through March and April. As a matter of fact, I'm not going to lie to you, I've already scheduled myself. I'm so confident we're going to come to a conclusion here today. And then we'd like to be back in May before you with the comments from the max, with the draft ordinance that we agreed to in concept today for a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors. And then we'd like to have this wrapped up at the board in June, early June, if at all possible. So with that, I don't know how you'd like to proceed. We could go through each one of these and you could tell me to include it or not include it. You could reject it outright. It's really at your discretion how you want to proceed.
Okay, why don't we go just, one at a time through the 7 items, and then that way we can comment, and if we want to do changes or reject or accept.
Went the wrong way. Wow. Okay, so the first one is, right now we have a definition of event, which we have talked about. The Vintners Association is asking that we replace the event definition with the definition for promotional activity, and that the promotional activity have 2 sub activities contained in it, a routine activity and a special activity. I should say on the tail end of that, Routine activities would be unlimited, is the proposal. Special activities would be 12. And then anything beyond 12 would require an ARP.
I have a question. If indeed we were to do as we are doing now and considering revising it to the ordinance, would the mandarin growers be able to come at the next meeting and do the same thing, ask for a revisement, or the almond growers or someone else?
But that would be at your discretion.
But it would be possible. If they said, yeah, we'll listen to some more people about this.
If they came under public comment and you directed staff to come back for a 6th workshop, we would come back for a 6th workshop. Let me be clear, I do not want to come back for a 6th workshop. I would like some resolution today so that we can move forward. There's a possibility, there is, we are going to go to the max, we are going to discuss whatever comes out of this hearing today, and then we're going to be back here for a recommendation. So there's still some public process to go here.
But
George, I guess maybe to follow up on that, we went through the event ordinance.
Event center
and
ordinance, correct?
that's already been passed. But
Yes.
in terms of what we're looking at here today, some of the requirements in that are rather onerous.
In the event center ordinance?
Yeah.
They are.
And, the intent of that ordinance was also the same as this, to allow event centers to be supplemental to primary agricultural activities in the agricultural zone.
That was what we talked about when we did the event center ordinance.
And so
yes.
I guess just in the top of my mind, there's an incongruity that presents in between two Placer County ordinances potentially. I guess what Mickey might have been asking is, does that open the door? Or you're saying you don't want to see the door open, but at any rate, I guess kind of the issue I'm seeing is we went through all that many months of work with the event center, and we may have, depending on what we do here, produced an ordinance that basically, other than the one or two people that already have the permit, may be unimplementable. Or nobody will do it. Nobody will do it. So we produced a document that maybe didn't really have much meaning in comparison with what we might be looking at here.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just an issue. I don't know. You can't resolve it for me today, but
right.
in my head, it makes you wonder, what are we doing here, folks, kind of thing, when we produce one that's very restrictive, and now we're talking about another one that is very similar but not near as restrictive. So, I don't know how to rectify that.
So you understand, we brought forward what the vintners want. At this point, it's your decision about what you would like to do with regard to that proposal. You can allow parts of it, you can allow all of it, you can allow none of it. So if you have concerns, now's the time for us to discuss those. And I'm not going to advocate one way or the other. I'm going to make sure that you have the best possible information and understand everything, and then you will give me direction, hopefully, so I can move forward.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, like George, I don't know that I want to sit through another workshop. What if I need to, but don't know that that's something I aspire to do. That being said, some of the changes I'm seeing here kind of open the door to make this ripe for abuse.
Mm-hmm.
Whether the existing operators are currently abusing it or not isn't the issue. Some of this is kind of just like a blank check, it's just, it's an open door to be ripe for abuse. We kind of worked our way through this process and put in what we thought were some checks to prevent that abuse, and I see some of the teeth being pulled back out of those. With the enforcement not having much teeth to it already, I have some concerns about what we're potentially doing to the balance of the residential people around there. I understand very much that agricultural is a commercial use with related to the growing and production of the thing, but as soon as you open the door to sale of agricultural products, how far do you go? I mean, is leather products because they came from a cow? I mean, you can stretch that as far as the imagination can go. And I don't see anything in here that gives those who just want peaceful country living a shadow of hope that there's going to be some stops in this as to how far it can go. And I don't know if we ask when they go to the max, if you pose that question to them and get some recommendations from the max as to how we could add that into this or change this to get there, to get some assurances. But right now, I'm getting more uncomfortable with the way we're heading.
Well, I'm going to have to agree a little bit
Yeah.
with Jeffrey. And my concern is that I know it's somewhat facetious about the mandarin growers.
Yeah, I know.
But the concept is simply that if we've gone through a process to determine the answer to the questions that have been brought up in the public for the last year, and a special interest group comes at the very last minute as such making a proposal, and we start acting on them, are we showing favoritism over the other agricultural businesses in the county? I'm afraid we might be. They have special circumstances. I love wineries, but I fear other people saying, wait a minute, that's not, we didn't go through this process so that we change it at the last minute. And then I'm afraid that if we do this now, I mean, we could tweak it a little bit, but if we start changing entire definitions of event when we've been going through event center ordinances, it seems to me a little unfair to the other people who've been coming in for the last year and talking about it and their situation. Anyway, so as the rest of the board knows.
Yeah, let me see. I wanted to, I was a member of the Agricultural Commission many years ago, and one of the issues that was very much in the front of that commission was the ability for people that produce something on their land to be able to sell it. And it gets real confusing sometimes, like when this ordinance first started coming up many years ago, what the county really was looking at wineries when they started getting confused about the word commercial was that the wineries had to comply with all the same road restrictions that you'd have to comply with in a commercially zoned district. And it really challenges the farm sales part of it. It's kind of like a farm stand, and you need to sell your products out of your farm stand. And so, I guess what I'm getting at is, I think what we're talking about here is farm sales. And if we get too far from that, then we're getting into another area that maybe we don't want to go to. But, the boundary part of it, I surely hear that. I'm really kind of challenged by what we're seeing.
And I tend to agree with that because, I've heard some comments that were almost contradictory from the winery people saying, well, if we have a big wedding or somebody's big birthday and stuff, and then they end up having to shut down their tasting room for the ones that are coming in just to taste wine and buy it, saying, well, just get $100 for it, but we know that they're going to buy more product and it exposes it. Sure, it might expose it, but the people are there for the wedding. They're not there specifically for the wine. They're maybe for the ambience of the, like the setting or whatever, but it's not selling a product. So I guess in my mind, I always end up seeing the winery and tasting room become all of a sudden an event center where they can make more money a year, doing an event, doing weddings and other types of items than tending to the winery and the tasting room and stuff. And I have heartburn with making a big change with it. Now, if we're saying, in this draft ordinance that they can only have 20 people at a time, but the winery's big enough to have 25 or 30 people, and they can accommodate the parking without having to all of a sudden go out and park, you know, off the designated parking areas and stuff. That's something maybe we could look at. But, you know, I sort of agree with what everybody's saying, to open it back up and no restrictions and stuff is...
I do think that when you look at the winery business, and, you know, I kind of agree with it, maybe we didn't, or I shouldn't say we, you know, the way they conduct business, you know, has got to fit into this process. If we are putting stops in there that really get in the way of the way wineries do conduct business, you know, they have wine club groups, and there may be a fairly significant number of people, and they may, when they have their wine club people come pick up the wine, they, you know, have food and an event type thing around that. And so if our ordinance gets so restrictive that they can't really conduct a wine club event, or oftentimes, you know, an event at a winery where people just come and they bring their lunch and they get a bottle of wine and enjoy a conversation in the ambience of the foothills of Placer County. You know, that's an important aspect too, I think, because, you know, I mean, a lot of us live in the city, and, you know, if they get to go out in the country and have a great day, then, you know, they get to share some of what the ambiance of Placer County is, you know, as the people that live there. So,
but even with that, say you have 10 people drive in that are going to do that, they're not going to sit there and eat lunch and drink wine for 4 or 5 hours.
Oh, no.
You know, it's going to be for a short period of time, and they'd move on. I mean, I sort of see it as people coming to the tasting room. You know, you might have one group come in, and then as they're leaving, you know, other people they're coming and going, you know, all day long. But it's not like having, you know,
200 people at a
200 people coming and then being there for, you know, up to 12 hours, you know, just at one time, and all the music and stuff. Because I've heard where some of them talk about the food aspect of it. Well, we don't really need the commercial kitchen, or we're not doing.
See, where does a
musical
5-course
event.
meal out of a commercial kitchen fit into the agricultural country ambiance? You know, I mean, we're kind of swinging full circle and losing it again.
Yeah, and most wineries do, you know, the cheese or something that's right with the wine and they're tasting that. So,
I don't think any of us have an issue with wineries promoting their product. I think it's just to what extent we're willing to have them have an impact on these rural communities. I guess I have to say I'm biased, as I was when we went through the event center process too, because I previously lived near a facility that had outdoor events, and it is incredibly intrusive. I mean, it was very frustrating to not just myself, but everybody in the community around us. And so I'm very sympathetic to those who are impacted by this. So I would be very surprised, George, if you go out to the MAX, that they are strongly object to what's being proposed, because as Jeff stated, and I think I saw all our heads kind of shaking,
You say they would, or
would strongly oppose what the vintners are proposing. I think they would strongly oppose it. But I think, as Jeff was stating, and again I saw most of our heads shaking, yes, is this what they're proposing as far as the how you identify the different types of events and how many people can go to those events, that there will be abuse, and I think we just would really open the door up to a lot of issues if we allowed this to happen. And I know that we're sort of beating around the edges of this, but I would very clearly come out and tell you that I object to what they're proposing as far as identifying these events. I just think it's excessive. I think in other counties, I think somebody pointed this out, in a lot of the other counties, there's the acreage sizes are much greater, and so that there's more of a buffer between a lot of these rural areas and the people living who are not necessarily involved with the winery. Our county, I mean, I think we've gone back to this when we were going through the event center. If you look at how the parcel sizes, they are really small through a lot of this area. They've already been broken up. So that's why I think there's a greater sensitivity to how we look at it versus maybe some of these other counties. So again, I'm just going to throw it out there. I'm not. There's some of the other items I might be a little flexible on, but this one I can't see being flexible.
Okay, is that sort of a consensus?
I don't know that we gave George any direction at this
well,
point.
I'm thinking for removing the definition of event as a no, or changing it as.
Well, I don't know if I would say that it's consensus. I see some merit in what they're trying to do here. Like the explanation of the guy that wants a birthday party, and or the Board of Supervisor candidate that wants to have come to a winery and use that as a fundraiser and that kind of stuff. To feel limited in those, that's part of their business, to be able to get people out there. So I can hear that thing there. I guess maybe some of the things that we're talking about here with weddings and I don't know how you would define it, but to me it seems like if somebody wants to really have big events, they need to go to the event center ordinance. And so I'm kind of agreeing that maybe this tentative, the event center, event definition that we were going on before might be a little too restrictive, but I don't know how to loosen that up for you.
So would it be beneficial to maybe look at numbers for start of,
right?
If we have an unlimited number of events, do we cut the number of people down to 20 so Grandpa can have his birthday party and that kind of stuff, and assume that's less intrusive on the neighborhood than 75 or 100 people at an unlimited event, unlimited number of events?
Go through all of that
Yeah,
already?
I know. That's
Are you
what.
asking the same thing. Is it going to be okay for Paul but not for Peter?
Yeah.
Because I think we sort of said that anyway with the number that could come to the tasting room during a day.
We didn't set a number for the day. You could have a couple hundred people come through your tasting room in a day. If you drove up and then Commissioner Gray came, that there's no limit on tasting. Right. It's when a group of people come for a specified activity, birthday party, book club, that sort of thing.
Wedding.
That's an event.
What we've already defined as an event. What we spent a year defining, going through the numbers like Jeffrey said.
Mm-hmm. I kind of think maybe part of the problem here too is when we were talking about the event center definition, that was either administrative use permit or a conditional use permit. I forget exactly what it came out, but in this case, as it's proposed, this is a condition of zoning, so there's no no permits or
Administrative review at all.
Right.
Yeah.
It's open-ended.
And there's always the option if staff goes out to the max and there's a consensus from the max that the number needs to be upward or downward, we're going to bring that back to you guys for your consideration when we come back.
So if we left it the way it is and you presented it to the max like you were going to do before the vintners made their suggestions, then we'd still be hearing back from them saying the numbers aren't quite enough to keep our guys.
Yeah, I suspect that when I go forward to the max, that there will be much more robust debate because I believe the vintners are going to go as well this time. And when I come back, I'll have an idea of what the max thought was or was not a good idea. If you leave the definition of event in right now, if the max thought it was, needed to be moved upward or that we needed to put in, promotional activities or anything like that that's presented by the vintners, I'm going to bring that all back.
George, I guess one question I have, and I think you're probably going to have some fairly heated MAC meetings, but at any rate, I guess a concern is I'm hearing, maybe what I'm trying to express too is there's some business practices that go with running a winery. And in order to be successful in that business, and you're talking about reasonable business practices. And so in the discussion, I guess it seems like somehow, and I don't know if I can define it as well as some of the winery people, but at any rate, it seems like those business practices have to be somehow factored in, so when we finally come up with an ordinance, we just don't eliminate the business altogether, that we have provided an ordinance that allows, wineries to actually function as a business so that they can make some money.
So as you go forward, there's some of the things you might want to consider, like in the definition of event. If a winery is 4.6 to 10 acres, maybe 20, 50, whatever the number is, that's appropriate. But if you're over 10 acres, maybe you should be allowed to have a few more people or a larger number. Those are all things that you can consider when we come back, or not. Right. It's like at your discretion. Mm-hmm. I'm here to do what you would like to have done.
Sure. I just think if it goes back to the max, I would request, George, that you ask them specifically what they would recommend to stop this from being abused, from getting out of hand.
And when you go back, I'm sure the vintners will be putting their proposals to the max so that they can, influence them to influence us. But rather than us rechange everything that we've already done, I think that would be stepping backwards, to be honest.
Right. Yeah, I think what you should present to the max is what we came up with at the last workshop, and that the vintners can certainly make an argument that they believe it's too restrictive at those MAC meetings, and you get your feedback.
Yeah. Okay, gentlemen, there's two things in here, though, that I would actually like to change. I would like to change the definition of tasting facilities. It's the same definition, it's just a little bit more specific. It spells out the law. That I think that would be.
Yeah, I don't have a problem. I think I agreed with.
And the second thing is, I would also like to bring forward the new chart, not without the routine and special activities. This new chart, I did this chart mostly for the benefit of everyone who's going to read this ordinance. This chart is much easier to follow for a lay person. It's like multiplication tables, whereas our old charts are all over the place. This essentially says the same thing with the exception that in resort, the 6 pieces of property that we have, that you could have a winery. And I think we've already made the determination that you can do that, and I think we've discussed it here before, but this chart actually reflects it.
I don't have an objection to that, other than you have added what the vintners are proposing along the bottom.
That would come out.
Which you're going to take that off.
That would take out. I would take that out and just have the new chart in the ordinance I take out.
Right.
Can you go back to the last slide, please, George?
The
definitions, when you were just at before your chart.
You mean routine activity?
Okay. Where we have a reference to, where is it, the California Code? I'm not seeing it now, but you...
Oh, wait a minute, I'm sorry. I took you to the wrong, this one.
Okay. Can we get, like it says alcohol-related...
There we go. Sorry.
There we go. Incidental sales of wine-related merchandise and food as required by the state law. Is there, can we expect, I have no idea what that's saying, really.
You mean the related?
Well, what is related, what's allowed by law? Certainly the law itself must expand on it if we're referencing the law. I'd like to know a little bit about more what that allows.
Yeah, I can do that.
Thank you.
My assumption has always been it's T-shirts, hats, anything inside the tasting room that promotes their product.
Yeah,
that's what I've always assumed it is.
And I would assume logically that that's the case, but since we're dealing with law, logic fails often, and I'd just like to know for sure.
Yeah, and the other thing I would tell you is the task force from the county did visit most of the wineries. I didn't go to every one. but most of the wineries do sell things exactly like I just described. Not even to that extent, really. Most of them don't have T-shirts. Most of them don't have hats. They just have stuff. Nothing super offensive. I mean, that was pretty definitive, wasn't it?
Mr. George?
Yes.
On number 5?
Number 5, noise regulations.
Yeah, maybe it makes sense, but that last sentence, it says, if a winery is required to have a conditional use permit, minor or administrative use permit by ordinance, limits on noise may be placed on those permits that are more restrictive, but if less restricted than the, I've been reading that 2 or 3 times, and I don't know really what it says. Of course, I'm not an attorney, so.
Which word is it? If a winery is required to have a conditional use permit,
But in case less restrictive.
By this ordinance, limits on the noise may be placed on those permits that are, that are more restrictive. But are more restrictive, but in no case less restrictive than the standards contained in this section. So whatever noise regulations are contained in the ordinance that we bring forward, if you had to get a conditional use permit for a winery, that conditional use permit could have more restrictive regulations that are in the ordinance, but in no case less. So in other words, it's even a more tightening of noise regulations. So when you get a use permit, it's a possibility of for tightening. Yes, thank you. I'll fix the typo.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, Richard, you could be a lawyer.
What?
I said, you could be a lawyer.
No.
You're reading that.
Enough said?
Yeah.
So I'll fix the typo on that, and we'll move forward. So tasting facilities, wine-related merchandise, noise stays the same?
Stays the same.
Yeah. Stays the same. Anything else? So essentially what I'm hearing is everything basically stays the same with the exception of you don't have a problem with the chart, you don't have any problem with the change in the tasting room definition to be more specific with regard to the code. And
alcohol.
And a definition of alcohol and wine-related merchandise, you'd like to know more about what that is. And also, when I go out to the MAX, Commissioner Moss also asked me to present the idea of what might be an appropriate number if they disagree with the one that's in our definition of event that you've proposed. What would be an appropriate number? Would it be 50 or 75 if you have 20 acres or 10 acres? Or to be 100, or something like that, to get that information and bring it back to you.
I guess also just one more thing. It seems like at the max, maybe you need to have an invited representative.
A what? I'm sorry?
Invited representative of the wineries or the Ag Commission that can discuss the conditions that are required as part of reasonable business practices if you're going to be in the winery business?
My understanding from the vintners having conversations before this workshop.
What's that?
My understanding from the Vintners Association, having had conversations with them prior to this workshop, is that they intend to send someone to every MAC to put forth their position. So
Would somebody from the agriculture department also go?
From the ag, that would be I would leave that up to Josh Hunsinger, who was sitting behind me. Still sitting behind me, the agricultural commissioner, that if he would like someone there to represent their position. I will.
He asked for best management practices.
Yeah.
One side should have the other side supposed to explain.
So as part of the MAC process, well, not a MAC, I do go to the agricultural commission, and I do treat it just like a MAC. I ask for their opinion, I ask for their input, and like on event centers, I brought that information back to you with the MAC information. Okay. So that was very helpful, actually, and I've learned a lot since the event center ordinance. I've actually scheduled the Ag Commission right up front, so I can get the Ag Commission's opinion about how they think wineries should operate in the agricultural regions. Having that knowledge as I move forward into the max is very helpful to me.
Okay, that's all I'm asking for.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, if I understand right, with a few changes that I discussed a little bit earlier, the ordinance stays as is, and I take it forward to the max. Is that correct?
Yeah, from our position.
Do we need to take a vote on that, Karen? No? No.
As long as it's clear as mud.
I should not have asked.
Thank you, George.
Okay, so the motion would have to contain, that the ordinance goes forward as is, with the exception that the new chart be installed, with the addition of the resort allowance. That would be one part of the motion. Second part would be that the tasting room regulations can be changed per the Vintners Association. Could be changed per the regulation on there with the more specific state stuff. Three, let me think, there's a third. Oh, that define wine merchandise in the tasting room. What is wine merchandise? Did I miss anything?
Any changes to the noise ordinance section, or is that going to remain the same with the?
No, it's going to remain the same,
it's a
and
typo.
then we'll see.
And then back to the zoning chart, what the changes do not include the routine activities and special activities.
Right. Do not include routine or special.
And then did we never really got into the kitchen?
No, you already did the kitchen.
I mean,
Well,
We did the kitchen several times.
yeah, but it's no.
Yeah. Can we just, are you done?
I'm done.
Okay, can we just say so move? Or do we need to?
Yes.
Yeah, so move.
Second.
Yeah. And then,
Are we doing a vote on this?
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Roll
Karen
call.
asked for a vote.
Doesn't have to do roll call?
Yeah. We'll do the roll call.
Mr. Sivison's absent. Mr. Gray?
Yes.
Mr. Moss?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Nader?
Yes.
Mr. Cucci's absent. Mr. Denio?
Yes.
Let me see, just real quickly before, on the, I guess Jeffrey was the one that was bringing up restaurants.
Yes.
And I think I heard this is just clarification, I think I heard you say that restaurants are pretty well described in another ordinance?
In the winery ordinance, it actually says, and this might need some tightening up, it actually says you can have a commercial kitchen in association with the winery for on-site events. However, you cannot run a restaurant.
Okay.
And, yeah. And as the ordinance is written, it made great sense. But if it were to change, it would change. It would need to change. It would need to be much more specific depending on the direction this goes in.
Yeah.
As written, it works. If there's a change in the amount of events or something that could take place, we might need to revisit that provision.
So I can drive a truck through that ordinance.
Well.
Mr. Chairman, Agricultural Commissioner was putting his hand up here.
Oh, Josh, did you have a comment?
One little clarification I wanted to add on the commercial kitchen issue. As George mentioned, we went around and with various county staff and visited a number of our wineries to ascertain exactly what's going on, in practice. And our environmental health department was one of the departments that went with us on those visits, and they are, of course, responsible for regulating the California Food Code. And one of the points they made very clear and reiterated over and over again, so that although I'm not an expert on the California Retail Food Code, you hear something often enough, it sticks with you. And their strict interpretation of our food safety laws is that if you take a knife out and cut a slice of cheese, put it on a plate, and hand it to somebody, that requires some level of commercial kitchen facility to be on site in order to make sure that knife is cleaned properly and that dish is cleaned properly and that food safety is ensured. So just as you think about this commercial kitchen facility issue, there's commercial kitchens and then there's commercial kitchens. So please just keep that in mind, that any type of food prep, such as little snacks, anything other than opening up a bag of crackers and dumping them out onto a paper plate without touching anything, basically requires a commercial kitchen of some sort. So I just want to add that in for your thought.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay, thank you, George. And thank you all for coming.
Did you have
and
a couple more comments that were unrelated?
Yes, we did. I'm sorry. There were a couple people, if they're still here, that wanted to make comments on other items than these. And if you'd like to come up and talk about it, we'll let you, and thank you, everybody else that's...
You were so quick on the hammer. We were reaching down, and Mr. Stevenson had to leave. My name is B.J. Baker, and we just want to talk about the Douglas Corridor and the Quarry Ponds adventure or proposal that's coming up. So basically, Mr. Stevenson said that he wanted to thank you so much for allowing us to attend the meeting, and what we want to focus on is stressing the Granite Bay Community Plan and an effort, these aren't my notes, so forgive me, and the time that it's taken to put the community plan by the MAC, and the BOS, Planning Commission, and the community, and the deviations from this plan, which have been approved since 2012, that have had major impacts or would have major impacts on the rural lifestyle of our community, and that we are requesting a number, and the requesting of a number of variances of the rezoning on Douglas. We want to stress that there are already empty businesses and office buildings along the Douglas Corridor in Granite Bay, and by building some of the future I believe there's 5 or 6 new proposals, there are already buildings that people can rent that are empty. So we want you to think about that as we go forward. And in regards to Quarry Pond, an event center should be located at either end of the corridor, not in the middle. And that's a 1 mile radius. I was just looking at it on my community plan because I did work on the community plan. That's a 1 mile radius that we're talking about inserting these 6 new rezoning businesses. And on mine, I'll talk about that. So, and the next question that we want to ask about, besides the safety and traffic hazards of the pond and the event center there, is why would the Planning Commission allow Lisa Powers, who already went bankrupt on Quarry Pond, build another development adjacent to that? It's kind of strange. And there are a few events that do not serve alcohol. Would you want your children driving up the Douglas Corridor, and along with 250 impaired drivers that have just left an event in the middle of Douglas, trying to make U-turns and speeding, and then others that are speeding along Douglas? And then Mr. Stevenson also said to consider the traffic versus the commercial corridor of Douglas. And the market research, what market research indicates that the drives need for such a project, that there's a drive that needs such a project and a structure on Douglas. And then he wrote, last of all, what is the long-term impact on the Granite Bay overall in property values, congestion, and road maintenance, public safety, and the public safety requirements? So everyone's really concerned about this, the ponds, as well as, for me, my part of the Douglas corridor, which I have many friends that just don't care for driving Douglas at all. I personally don't mind it. I'm from the Bay Area, and I get through it quite well right now. But I was just trying to do the math on the 26 lofts that are going into the pond if it passes. And then, indeed, the 4 or 5 new proposals of rezoning on Douglas, which would be the ponds, the memory care center, the Granite Bay Medical Office, and the Granite Bay Estates Professional Center. And I kind of did the math, and I said that if you have 26 lots, and all of those have at least 2 people at any hour of the day maybe coming in and out, along with all the office doors that would go into those 4 proposals, and in that 1 mile radius, I'm thinking that we could possibly get 500 or more cars at any one time, not counting the event center, going in and out Douglas. And I personally live on the corner of Berg and Douglas, kind of just around the corner on Granite Falls Way. And I enjoy watching people walk their dogs, ride their bikes, and walk. And I'm thinking that if all of this gets approved, I'd really like you to think about my community and how beautiful it is right now. And what are we going to do with that 1 mile radius and all the open area? And I like red wine, and listening to everyone today that was here, I think it'd be really wonderful if we just grow some grapes there and have some of those events and wine tasting. Thank you very much.
Hello, and thank you for giving us the opportunity, because I did take time off from work to come here. I appreciate it. And it's very short. I wrote it up. It's basically what... Oh, my name is Arlene Keeley, and I live on Burke Street in Granite Bay. I just wanted to kind of say what she's saying, but I did prepare something. I wanted to say that there are numerous Granite Bay projects in the pipeline which will come up for your approval soon. All of them require significant variances from the Granite Bay Community Plan, either for rezoning or for variances to setbacks and signage. One even proposes to eliminate 99% of the existing trees in order to accommodate the construction of 2 buildings and parking. These projects will more than likely trigger the installation of a traffic light at Bergen Douglas, which is not supported in the circulation element of the plan. An additional traffic light less than a half mile from Barton Road will hinder the corridor design of Douglas Boulevard. This design was to keep non-local traffic moving efficiently from Folsom to Roseville, keeping that traffic outside our neighborhood streets. None of these projects support the goals and policies of the recently updated community plan. In fact, they're in direct conflict with the primary focus of the plan, which is to offer a rural lifestyle characterized by the predominance of large lots in the northern section of the community and limited commercial development. And it goes on, but those are what I wanted to say. Any new development shouldn't be in direct contrast to this goal. Our community plan provided for the current landscape, the green open space we, existing residents, desire and appreciate. Please do not allow this plan to be treated as a starting point going forward for negotiation. This plan should be respected and enforced. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Did you have any comments? EJ?
No, just real quick. I mean, there's as I talked to a few of the commissioners earlier today, there's probably a dozen or so new projects down the Granite Bay area. So that's something that, the commission will have to look forward to. There's a lot of different issues related to all of those. Right now, most of them are going through environmental review, so they're kind of in the early stages of the process. And all of those will be going to the MAC, Granite Bay MAC, of course, as information items, also action items. The ponds project is further along than all of them. They are through their environmental review process. That will probably be scheduled for the commission either late March or early April. So that'll probably be the first Granite Bay project that will be under for your consideration.
Okay. Thank you. With that, we'll go ahead and close the meeting. Bang, Jack.